Chapter 201. 200 chapters have been completed. Thank you for your support. Please vote and reward. Loki woke in a cold sweat, as if he'd just emerged from the strangest nightmare. In that dream, he'd been transformed into a reindeer and forced to obey a mysterious stranger's every command. He'd handed over every scrap of arcane knowledge he'd ever mastered, blood and hair included, just to prove his loyalty. For all his playful antics, Loki was the most powerful mage in the 9 realms, his command of magic surpassing even the greatest sorcerers of Kamar Taj. But Asgard had little use for sorcery. Warriors here trusted swords and shields, not spells. Queen Frigga's own magical talent came from her ancient divine lineage. It was hardly a practice common among her people. In truth, the enchantments Ethan had imparted to that stranger traced back to the legendary magic of the Warner Protoss, a heritage Loki himself barely understood. Frigga lacked the strength to stand against a dark elf, and in a fair fight she would fall. Yet Ethan cared not whether Asgard's rulers faltered. His sole pursuit was power and knowledge. He had claimed the Eternal Spear, an artifact of unimaginable might, and departed without a backward glance. Now Loki was left alone. He stumbled from his chambers back to the Hall of the Gods, reaching out to greet his comrade in the familiar way. But there was no one there to shake his hand. A hollow silence echoed through the marble corridors, and Loki realized just how much he had lost. Gungnir. Loki's voice echoed through the empty halls of the Immortal Palace. He spun around, searching desperately for the Eternal Spear, only to find cold marble floors and silent corridors. The spear was gone. He racked his memories for any clue. Everything had been perfectly normal moments ago. Had someone betrayed him and spirited Gungnir away? The thought sent a chill through him. Without the spear, and without the destroyer armor, he dared not summon the frost giant king, Laufey, to assassinate Odin. How could he hope to confront Laufey and protect himself, let alone his adoptive family, without those 2 artifacts? Worse still, the latest report from Jotunheim had only brought bad news. The frost giant's attempt on Thor's life had failed. When Laufey arrived, Loki would have to reprimand him for his cowardice, and then force him to finish the job himself. Across the palace, Ethan knelt before the displaced spear, running his fingers over its intricate golden runes. He'd already mastered the secrets of Thor's hammer, shattering its enchantments before reforging them at will. But Gungnir was on a different level. Dozens upon dozens of ancient inscriptions, each pulsing with latent power. Ethan's breath caught as he read the primary oath woven into the spear's haft. He who swears by Gungnir's name must fulfill his vow. A single binding clause, but it carried a caveat. Its true strength lay not in the words themselves, but in the resolve and capability of the one who wielded it. Potential, might, foresight, all were meaningless, unless the bearer could bring the oath to life. He lifted the spear, feeling its weight and the quiet promise of the runes. In his hands, Gungnir hummed with anticipation, ready to bend to whoever, or whatever, proved worthy. For a mere mortal to wish himself into godhood on the scale of an entire universe, that's simply impossible. The only exception would be someone absurdly fortunate, like Sentinel. When Ethan finally deciphered the runes, he effectively unlocked the secret to forging the Eternal Spear. But that was only half the battle. If he wanted to craft his own artifact from scratch, he couldn't rely on ordinary transformation magic. He needed a blend of deformation magic, biological force fields, and raw reality manipulation, a combination powerful enough to spin something out of nothing. Transformation spells alone can't alter the fabric of existence, and reality warping by itself lacks the structure to hold. Even once you reshape reality, you must supply your own LL power to sustain the change. Without the anchoring effect of a power gem, any such modification will decay. Fortunately, Ethan possesses 3 power gems, giving him the capacity to lock his changes in place indefinitely. Still, he didn't depend solely on those gems. Above all else, he believed in his own strength, and that, more than any artifact or gemstone, was the true key to making his vision permanent. Ethan grinned to himself. If he ever managed to slip into the DC universe, he'd have to convince Wonder Woman to let him study one of her magical weapons up close. Runes are astonishing, he mused, pacing the workshop. You can combine them in countless ways. The only problem is the sheer number of permutations. Thank goodness, my super brain already crunched the numbers. For a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then suddenly it relaxed. His enhanced intellect really was unfair. What would stump any ordinary scholar took him less than a femtosecond. He'd arrived at the perfect formula. Strength bracers, he announced, voice ringing with satisfaction. Ethan raised his hands and began the incantation. Transformation magic flared around him, reshaping the raw materials at his fingertips. He drew on 3 legendary metals. The super alloy gleaned from the Dragon Ball world, the secret Uru metal formula he'd recovered alongside the Eternal Spear and Mjolnir, and the vibranium fragments he'd painstakingly collected. Under normal circumstances, fusing these metals into a stable alloy would demand months of trial and error. But Ethan had another trick up his sleeve. With a subtle gesture, he activated his biological force field. The atoms aligned themselves perfectly, bonding instantly into a single, impossibly strong alloy. In less time than it took to blink, the glowing metal coalesced into a pair of bracers, each etched with the intricate rune sequence he'd devised. He lifted the finished bracers, feeling their power hum against his skin. More than simple armor, these were symbols of what his mind and a little magic could achieve. And this was only the beginning. Ethan worked tirelessly to forge a new pair of wrist guards from raw materials. He fused 3 different super alloys into a single alloy plate, then meticulously etched arcane runes across their polished surfaces. Drawing on his own life force, he ignited the runes, and they flared with energy. "These will boost my strength tenfold," he whispered. Slipping the gauntlets onto his forearms, Ethan immediately felt raw power flood his muscles. The runic script was the same ancient pattern that had given birth to the World Tree, a multi-dimensional entity, so it made sense that these inscriptions resonated so strongly with his own power. He paused, unsettled by a sudden thought. But can Odin really be so forgiving? The Eternal Spear is gone. It was surprising to imagine Odin so willing to negotiate. If the Allfather truly sought to develop the Destroyer armor, it would be for the same reasons: to bind divine power into its form, or to contain its eternal flame. Those were treasures beyond price. The armor itself, however, was far less remarkable now that Uru metal and runic forging had become commonplace. Ethan let that disappointment go, turning instead to the future. Now, the Sun Plate armor. He pictured a suit of battle armor with unmatched magical resistance, its plating charged with solar energy and stellar power. With the right combination of star-forged runes and celestial enchantments, he vowed to create a warplate that would eclipse every other. Although Ethan is no longer a pure Kryptonian, his cells now infused with the brute strength of Doomsday and the legendary power of Broly, there's still no guarantee that he won't one day face a life-or-death crisis that forces him to depend on his armor for survival. He was deep into forging his own artifact when the Eternal Spear drifted from his forge and shot straight up into the sky. Can it really return on its own, even when it's not thrown? Ethan murmured in surprise as he watched the spear vanish into the clouds. He could have halted it with a thought, but there was no point. Today was not the day to challenge Odin. Moments later, a gust of wind announced the Destroyer armor's departure from Midgard. The enchanted suit streaked upward to join the Eternal Spear, both summoned home by Odin's will. Ethan frowned. Is everything following some preordained script? Thor may have lost his divine might, but he still commands the fires of the underworld. At S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters, Thor had become a living furnace, his body wreathed in hellfire. Nearby, Loki and Laufey were locked in a heated debate. Laufey was adamant that Thor, stripped of his divine power, posed no real threat and shouldn't be pursued back to Midgard. Loki, however, suspected a trap. Ethan shrugged. With Thor's hammer and godly essence gone, how could he truly defend himself against rivals, or against Laufey's frost giant host? Even the tallest frost giant is still a frost giant, and 100 of them charging at you can be quite dangerous. He clenched his fists. Whatever games the gods were playing, Ethan would be ready. The Eternal Spear and the Destroyer armor might have retreated for now, but he had his own destiny to forge, and this time, he'd make sure the script bent to his will. Midgardians killed those warriors? That's preposterous. Laufey doesn't care a whit about Midgard. He's no Heimdall. His knowledge of that realm is still stuck in the days of the Vikings. Do you honestly believe a horde of barbarians could stand against frost giant warriors? No, it's far better to let him think Thor hasn't lost an ounce of his divine power. After all, this is nothing more than a conspiracy aimed at discrediting the frost giants. Chapter 202. Tony is defeated again. From Laufey's point of view, the whole thing reeked of conspiracy. Loki had lost patience with Laufey's blunders and promptly laid him out cold. But as the plan slipped through his fingers, Loki abruptly noticed that the fabled Spear of Eternity had reappeared. Only it wasn't on display as a weapon, but serving as a makeshift clothes rack. "The Spear of Eternity?" Loki cried, slapping his forehead. When had he hung his tunics and cloaks on its tip? Dozens of garments draped limply over the legendary blade, turning the universe's greatest weapon into an expensive coat stand. Had he truly mistaken his most powerful artifact for a mere hanger? And if so, why had he charged into battle armed with nothing but discarded robes? A wave of confusion washed over him, as though some crucial memory had been erased. He clenched his fists, determined to clear the haze. This was Asgard. Who could tamper with his mind here? Odin still lay trapped in eternal slumber, powerless to rearrange another god's recollections. And the Queen Mother was unaware of his scheme, so there'd be no reason to wipe his memory. Dismissing the nagging doubt, Loki raised his voice and commanded, "Destroyer, attend me!" I must have been overthinking it. I didn't expect my nerves to betray me now, just as the plan was finally coming together. Loki never bothered to rummage through the vault for the destroyer armor. He already knew that once he held the eternal spear, he could command it at will. Instead, he let it summon itself. A moment later, the air before him crackled with energy, and the hulking figure of the destroyer materialized. Living metal coalesced into an implacable warrior, its eyes glowing with otherworldly light as it took its place before Loki. He murmured under his breath, "Very good." Watching that silent exchange, I saw triumph dawning in his expression. The frost giant's assault had failed to slay Thor, and now even the destroyer might prove ineffective. Loki no longer needed Laufey's forces to tip the scales, yet he intended to draw Laufey in anyway, to tighten his grip on Asgard. The real catalyst for Loki's fury wasn't the frost giant's failure, but the insubordination of Sif and the three warriors of Asgard. They'd conspired with Heimdall to retrieve Thor from Midgard and restore him to command, a direct challenge to Loki's authority. If they wouldn't bend the knee and swear fealty, Loki decided they would all perish together on Midgard. Otherwise, his reprisals would be more subtle, sever their communications, and replace Heimdall as guardian of the Rainbow Bridge. Either way, no one would stand in his way. Loki's confidence was absolute. Even though he'd never actually seen the true destroyer, he believed the plain, unadorned prototype he'd studied was identical to the magnificent gilded war machine of myth. Without a second thought, he dispatched that crude automaton to Midgard, and at the same time ordered Princess Laufey, the third child of the frost giant king, to assassinate Odin. After all, royal blood implies training, and Laufey was hardly a novice. Loki trusted her completely. Meanwhile on Earth, Thor sensed something strange stirring within Mjolnir, a subtle, otherworldly power that shattered his mortal limits and rekindled the strength of a god. Determined, he burst into the hammer's locked chamber. Instantly, the room's fire suppression system roared to life, dousing the space with water, but as each droplet met Thor's superheated aura, it evaporated into mist. Undeterred, he strode forward and seized Mjolnir's handle with both hands. This time, nothing would hold him back. Veins of hellfire pulsed through him, spreading into the enchanted metal of the hammer, and at last, Thor lifted it high. Mjolnir shuddered in midair, then erupted in hellish flames as Thor snatched it from the sky. "Mjolnir!" he roared. In that instant, raw lightning surged through the hammer, tearing across the heavens with a series of thunderous cracks, boom, 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 until thousands of bolts danced between the clouds. Agent Coulson stared up in disbelief. "That's strange," he muttered. "The forecast didn't call for another storm today." "Has something changed on the hammer side?" another agent wondered aloud. Coulson was about to climb the ridge and get a closer look when a colossal shape hurtled earthward. "Mr. Stark?" he gasped. The fallen figure stood nearly 10 feet tall, a humanoid suit of gleaming silver metal plates, its shoulders and arms reinforced with thick rivets, an undeniably Tony Stark design. Relief flooded Coulson until the suit's faceplate slid open, revealing nothing but empty air. No pilot. Instead, a fierce inner flame flickered deep within the helmet. Before Coulson could react, a blood-red glow began to pulse from every seam and joint of the armor. The light intensified, converging into a single, blinding flare at the crown of its head. What had Tony built, and who, or what, was about to step out? The everlasting flame twisted in on itself, growing hotter and brighter by the second. Ethan's field instincts flared. He sensed imminent danger and dashed away before his mind could even catch up. A searing flash lit the corridor behind him. Ethan dove forward, landing where he'd just been standing. His leather boots felt as if they were melting on the scorched floor, yet he'd narrowly avoided direct contact. The air itself offered no relief, its usual heat-insulating effect shattered by the inferno. He tumbled across the deck, skidding backward as the wall he'd fled from ignited and crumbled. A blistering shockwave slammed into him, its heat like a hot knife slicing through butter. Everything in its path liquefied under the light of destruction. In a single thunderous blast, the destroyer's beam bisected the base, targeting Thor, who'd sensed the attack too late to dodge. "I hate it when people interrupt my experiments," snarled a booming metallic voice as the armor known as the Destroyer powered down its weapon. Moments later, Tony Stark stormed into the ruins. His jaw dropped when he recognized the suit's design. "God's damn it," he swore under his breath. "Those Hydra bastards stole my tech." No Hydra sigil adorned the armor, but Tony knew exactly who'd engineered this contraption. "Wait, did you tell him this was an alien weapon?" Tony Stark thought, even as he scrambled to reassess the threat. He hadn't anticipated that. The destroyer's helm flared with focused energy, as if preparing to unleash a laser beam. Tony didn't hesitate. Without a word, he jammed both Palmar repulsors to full power. Brilliant arcs of blue-white fire streaked forward and slammed into the destroyer's own deadly discharge. The collision triggered a thunderous explosion that rippled outward in a shockwave. Clad in his nano-armored suit, Tony was blasted backward, tumbling through the air. The force was more than enough to send any man sprawling, but he fought the blast's pull and kicked on his suit's micro-thrusters. With careful bursts of propulsion, he guided himself back into control before smashing into anything solid. On the ground, Agent Phil Coulson barked orders into his radio. "Everyone out, now!" He, too, was staggered by what they were facing. Could Hydra really have built something this powerful? It didn't make sense. "Damn Hydra," Alexander Pierce muttered in a nearby command tent, annoyance creeping into his voice. He wasn't even sure why the thought rankled him so much, perhaps because it hit too close to home. In less than a minute, Tony realized he was hopelessly outmatched. No matter how sleek or clever his suit, this massive, emotionless armor refused to crack. The destroyer stood unyielding, its featureless steel visage radiating menace, and Tony knew he'd have to find another way to win. Chapter 203, Twin Hammer Thunder God. Tony Stark had always prided himself on being a genius. Ethan was a genius too, but they specialized in very different arenas. Tony could stomach being outmatched by Ethan in certain fields, but he refused to be bested in his own. Now, however, he found himself utterly confounded by Hydra's iron armor. It simply couldn't be. He'd poured his life's work into upgrading his armor and weapons, yet with every new enhancement, an even more twisted foe emerged. The frustration was almost palpable. Had he somehow broken a cosmic taboo? If the man inside that iron suit had been anyone from Asgard, anybody short of Odin, Tony would feel confident. His latest nano-armor had already ascended to cosmic-level power, far surpassing the bleeding-edge suit he wore in Avengers 4. That suit alone had allowed him to go toe-to-toe with Thanos. With this brand-new rapid update protocol, Tony believed he could not only last a few rounds against the Mad Titan, but possibly even gain the upper hand. Yet here he was, at a complete loss. Hydra's iron armor was an enigma, its power eclipsing everything Tony had ever built. He needed a breakthrough, and fast. If it hadn't been for that sudden energy blast, the destroyer armor's destruction beam would have cut right through Tony's suit. He hadn't even landed before the armor fired again. Tony slammed his forearms together, triggering hidden panels in his gauntlets that projected a shimmering energy shield. Boom! The destruction beam slammed into the barrier. Instantly, the the 3 arc reactors on his chest strained, ramping up output to keep the shield standing. If he'd tried that with a nanotech deflector, it would have evaporated. But a pure energy field, so long as his reactors held out, could absorb the strike, at the cost of draining massive reserves. Tony staggered back, panting. "Damn, where does this thing get so much power?" "Jarvis, status report!" he barked, whipping around and rocketing away. He needed Veronica online, fast. Seeing Tony withdraw, the destroyer armor pivoted instead toward Thor, its inhuman gaze fixed on the Thunder God. Above them, lightning forked across a roiling sky. Thunder crashed and bolts of raw electricity hammered the earth like ballistic weapons. In that maelstrom, the real battle was just beginning. The earth split open in a wave of blistering flame, turning the battlefield into a roiling sea of fire. Through the heat haze strode Thor, clad in gleaming silver armor and a blood-red cloak, gripping not 1 but 2 hammers. In his left hand, Mjolnir blazed with hellfire. In his right, Stormbreaker crackled with lightning entwined in flickering embers, as though the 2 weapons were locked in perpetual combat. Even Thor himself was wreathed in infernal flames, the fiery orb between his brows rising nearly half a meter above his brow. Ethan and Loki, who lay hidden behind the hulking form of the destroyer armor, froze at the sight. Ethan's mouth fell open, and even Loki, no stranger to surprises, found his eyes widening in disbelief. "What in all the 9 realms?" Loki whispered, remembering nothing of his previous time on Earth. He stared at the twin hammers, then at the raging fire around Thor. "You're the god of thunder, not the god of fire." Thor's voice rang out, low and resonant. "I'm back." Ethan recognized those words instantly. The hellfire flaring around Thor was more than a spectacular display. It was the scorching echo of a soul reborn. Unbeknownst to Thor himself, the inferno that danced across his armor drew its fuel from the deepest chambers of his own spirit, awakening memories and powers forged in flames long ago. Ethan watched the hellfire blaze around him and knew that, no matter how strong his soul was, it could not withstand such infernal intensity for long. Even Thor in his regular form would crumble before the combined might of Zatanos and the spirit of vengeance. Only a King Thor, or the Rune King Thor, would stand a chance. This Thor was still too inexperienced. One miscalculation, and the flame, would consume him completely. Of course, with Odin still alive somewhere, there might yet be a way to counteract this hellfire. But they couldn't rely on that right now. Taking a steadying breath, Ethan felt the comforting pulse of his bioforce field reassert itself. Hellfire would take 10,000 years to burn through that shield. It was secure. He folded the field back around himself, reclaiming its protection. Across the battlefield, Thor held Mjolnir in his left hand, its familiar weight a reassurance to him. He had missed this hammer more than he realized. With an almost tender affection, he raised it and pointed directly at the destroyer. "Come here, destroyer!" At his command, the great animate armor swung toward him, as though pulled by an irresistible force. Midair, the destroyer's gauntleted fists ignited with crackling, destructive energy, ready to crush whatever stood before it. But Thor was ready. In his right hand, he spun his second hammer in a tight arc, then drove it upward in a thunderous strike. The blow slammed into the destroyer's chest plate, shattering its metal plating into fractals of flying debris. The fragments rained back to the ground as the armored colossus staggered, and then collapsed in the dust below. A searing beam of destructive energy ripped across the sky. Thor's gravity-infused hammer latched onto the destroyer's armor and yanked it down with bone-shaking force. The mechanical colossus bellowed, "Ah!" Without hesitation, Thor unleashed a brutal double strike, smashing the armored behemoth with both Mjolnir and the gravity hammer. Lightning danced around his form, mingling with hellfire, an unnerving fusion of Asgardian might and infernal power. Loki watched from a distance, his heart pounding. His brother had never looked more fearsome. The impact drove the destroyer to its knees, but its iron shell held firm. A second beam of destructive energy flared overhead, bristling with raw power. Thor grinned, undeterred. He flung Mjolnir into the heart of the blast, then swung the gravity hammer in a devastating arc. Mjolnir spun through the beam, shattering it from within, while the gravity hammer thundered into the armor's flank. A furious eruption of hellfire tore outwards. Boom! The destroyer's armor exploded into molten fragments, plunging into the infernal depths beneath them. Silence followed the roar, broken only by Thor's steady breathing and the distant echo of victory. Ethan watched in fascination as the Hellfire's own power rent open a gateway to the Netherworld, unwittingly triggered by Thor's errant strike. In a blink, the portal led straight to Mephisto's domain, effectively delivering the ancient destroyer armor onto the devil's doorstep. "What a fortunate accident," Ethan murmured, a half-smile playing on his lips. With a thought, he froze time. In less than a heartbeat, he lifted the destroyer armor from its resting place and pocketed it, leaving Mephisto face the consequences of its sudden disappearance. Could Odin detect the theft? Ethan chuckled. Between his bioenergetic force field and the power of 3 infinity gems, he was effectively cloaked from any but the most omnipotent gaze. Odin would have to be a god of near-infinite perception to see through that. He regarded the stolen armor thoughtfully. Untangling the divine enchantments woven into its enchanted plates would be a complex, drawn-out analysis, but once he decoded them, replicating the armor's godly might would be child's play. Of course, he planned to design something sleeker, far more elegant than the clumsy original. As for Thor, now brandishing that curious gravitation hammer, Ethan rolled his eyes. All Thor seemed to know was how to ensnare his enemies in crushing gravity wells. He hadn't the faintest idea of the relic's true, far-reaching capabilities. Ethan pocketed the destroyer armor's core fragment and slipped back into motion. The game was only just beginning. Ethan was convinced that Thor could never conceive of something like that. Chapter 204, Mars Colonization. The blueprint for the new human project came together astonishingly fast. Ethan had supplied such a wealth of exotic genetic material that the director spent long nights weaving it all into a workable sequence. At last he stood before the viewing window, eyes alight. "Behold the future of humanity," he announced. "We are the true pioneers of human evolution." Behind him, rows of reinforced biocontainment pods hummed softly. "We've combined Loki's frost giant royal genome with Thor's Asgardian bloodline, the very lineage destined to produce a god king. We've injected the Extremis virus, the Green Goblin's serum, and Hulk's gamma-irradiated blood. On top of that, we spliced in the samples Ethan recovered from the Dragon Ball dimension and the Super Seminary world." He paused, letting his words resonate. "The result is a being that breaks every rule of physics." He tapped a control pad and projected a 3D model of one subject, a lean, powerfully muscled figure standing just over 6 feet tall. Their body density is 5 times that of a normal human. Increased density means increased mass, so despite their height, each of these new humans weighs no less than 1,000 kilograms. They're outright stronger than most Asgardians and rival even the frost giants themselves. Ethan watched the simulations scroll by on the holoscreen. These new humans would become the engine of Mars's terraformation, an invincible workforce capable of surviving and shaping an environment where ordinary humans would perish. The colonization phase was about to begin. After Ethan's enhancements, their bodies still look human, but they're 5 times as dense. What does 5 times denser mean in practice? It means they can start out able to lift tens of tons. Their flesh is nearly invulnerable, and they're effectively indestructible. Try driving a missile into one of them, and you'll find out just how tough they are. Their lifespans far exceed those of ordinary humans, though they don't match up to the ages of Asgardians, who routinely live past 5,000 years, and even longer, thanks to special life-extending rights in Asgard. From the viewpoint of Earth's pantheon, the Aesir, the Asgardians, are actually among the new gods. They were born from the residual energies released when the Demogorge consumed the Elder Gods and then exploded, seeding a fresh divine ecosystem on Earth. Physiologically, these new deities differ from the old Olympians. The Greek and Roman gods are few in number but truly immortal, whereas the Asgardians, though far more populous, still age, albeit at a glacial pace. To maintain their youth and vigor, they must regularly partake of the golden apples tended by Idun in Asgard. Sound familiar? In Asgard, there's a tradition much like the Peach Festival of the Queen Mother, the gathering of the golden apples. Just as the immortals answer Shi-Wang-Mu's summons to taste her life-extending peaches, Asgardians come to Idun's orchard for these enchanted fruits, but only a select few may claim them. The apples themselves grow on a sacred tree tended by the goddess Eton. They're not handed out freely. Only those who have earned Eton's favor, or who bear special titles, may pluck them. Royalty naturally qualifies, but the privilege extends beyond kings and queens. The Valkyries of the 10 Realms, for example, are chosen to serve in the halls of Valhalla, among them the celebrated Brunhild, once a noblewoman of a distant kingdom. Likewise, the 3 champion warriors known as the Einherjar are each granted a golden apple. Consuming one of these apples bestows a tangible boon. The eater's strength, speed, and magical aptitude all surge beyond the ordinary. In fact, while every sentient being of the 9 realms might loosely be called an Asgardian, it's those who master the high arts of magic or who have eaten Eton's golden fruit who truly walk among the gods. To a mortal of Midgard, even these superlative Asgardians appear divine. Ethan leaned back in his chair, weighing the lessons he'd learned from the gens of the Queen Mother's peach banquet. Even a low-rank immortal could claim a share of those fabled peaches. After all, the banquet was never emptied in one go, and the fruits only grew more precious with age. Securing a single peach was already a coveted prize. But the true key to ascension lay in the golden apples. Only those who performed extraordinary deeds could earn the right to taste of them and be reborn. Inspired, Ethan decided to recreate that system for his own realm. He experimented at first with a silver broccoli concoction, quickly scrapping it as too gimmicky, before perfecting what he would call the Fountain of Youth. Its shimmering, liquid gold waters not only halted the march of time and restored vitality, but also temporarily amplified the drinker's strength. Best of all, the elixir was a currency of loyalty, a reward he could grant to meritorious followers, binding their allegiance to him far more effectively than any mind control spell. Ethan was determined not to rely solely on psychic domination. The universe already teemed with telepaths and mental manipulators. Unchecked, they were as likely to turn on him as on his enemies. Instead, he would rule through a blend of self-interest, awe, and power, and a taste of the fountain for anyone willing to prove their worth. Moreover, he planned to introduce a subtle implant in every Martian and Venusian under his sway, a failsafe to ensure that no one ever forgot where their true loyalty lay. In this way, Ethan would build an empire of willing devotees, united by ambition, bound by gratitude, and held in thrall by the promise of ever-renewed youth. On Mars and Venus alike, a select few carry a hidden gift, the power to transform into hulks. Not everyone can do it, but those who can are chosen to serve as the Emperor's angels, a corps of hulking muscle warriors far superior to the standard Star Warriors. In their transformed state, each angel boasts biological strength roughly 5 times that of a calm green Hulk, and that's before they tap into any rage-fueled enhancements. Once the transformation is complete, these warriors are further categorized by color, each hue denoting a different rank and specialty. With the New Humans initiative now in motion, Thor had stormed off to exact revenge on the Ghost Rider, only to come up empty. No sooner had he returned than Heimdall, just thawed from his icy prison, appeared in a flash of light and delivered grim news from Asgard. Within moments, Thor was whisked back across the cosmos, leaving Earth's defenders one god short. That left Ethan with only one truly pressing concern, the looming Chitauri invasion. Every other threat felt like idle background noise by comparison. Late that evening at Stark Tower, Tony Stark was running on fumes, poring over mission readouts, when Jarvis's measured tone broke the silence. "Sir, Monarch International appears to be mobilizing significant assets." Tony rubbed his temples. "What's Ethan up to now?" he muttered, and braced himself for the answer. Ethan's every bold initiative had turned into good news. Now word was spreading that Compound Nar 3 might be ready any day, an almost unbelievable pace, given how long Compounds number 1 and number 2 had taken. Tony stared at the headlines on his tablet, stunned. Emperor International's Mars landing capsule touches down successfully. Emperor International announces Mars migration. Farewell, Earth. Emperor International kicks off Mars colonization. Is the age of cosmic settlement upon us? Tony swallowed. Have we really entered the era of interplanetary colonization? Ethan leaned over, tapping the last headline. Who was it that pioneered a leap like this before? Who opened the frontier first? Tony glanced toward the recovery bay, where their latest recruit still lay sedated. "He's not awake yet," Tony said. "Vitals are perfectly normal, though." "Good," Ethan replied, settling back in his chair. He fell silent for a moment, as if recalling something from a half-forgotten myth. "You know, it reminds me of the old Norse sagas of Dabar, out Thor. They all wrote him off as a lunatic, until he appeared on Earth wielding 2 hammers, unleashed a storm powerful enough to shatter the destroyer armor, and calmly announced he was Odin's son. After that display of thunder, and even fire, they finally had to believe. It's astonishing to think how badly the scholars misrecorded it." Tony nodded thoughtfully. A reminder that our greatest leaps often come from the most unexpected sources. Ethan smiled. "Exactly. Now let's see if compound number 3 can live up to that legacy." Thor suddenly announced that he was going to hunt down the burning skull and exact his revenge, to show everyone just how powerful he truly was. Ignoring all objections, he took to the skies and flew off. Chapter 205, Reactions from All Parties. He can't do this on his own. Mars belongs to all humanity. He has no right to colonize it without our consent. Relax. He still needs Earth's resources to build up on Mars. That's our leverage. Exactly. A murmur of agreement rippled through the conference room. "Last time we tried to rein him in, and he just walked away," someone reminded them with a sneer. "This time it's different," another delegate countered, voice firm. "He intends to establish a full-scale colony. We'll mobilize every nation to withhold cooperation. With the prospect of Martian real estate so lucrative, no one will stand aside and let him have it all." "We're talking about the biggest prize in human history," a third delegate added. "We can't afford to let one man, Ethan, of all people, hijack this effort. There will be no compromise." Leaning forward, the lead speaker tapped the table for emphasis. "Once Ethan's Mars colonization technology is proven, the world will unite to block him. Every government, every corporation, every research institute will fall in line. After decades of dreaming about our first outpost on another planet, no one will stand by and let him scoop up the glory and the profits alone." Heads nodded in grim agreement. They all knew colonizing Mars was no small feat, and that no single private actor, no matter how brilliant, could stand against a united Earth. Ethan leaned back, watching the holo display flicker with data. The prize on the table was staggering, enough resources to shut out every rival. It was a colossal pie, far too big for any single nation to devour alone, and heavy enough to crush anyone who dared get in its way. In an arena like this, anyone who opposed the scramble would be swept aside by the roaring tides of geopolitics. But Ethan didn't care about Earth's resources. He'd never needed them. In fact, the entire announcement had been his provocation, a deliberate taunt directed at America. He could almost taste the panic on their faces when they discovered he wasn't tapping into terrestrial stores at all, but expanding his empire on Mars. The thought of their shock, envy, and seething resentment made his pulse quicken. Meanwhile, world leaders stewed in anticipation, waiting for the moment to unleash their self-righteous speeches. What they didn't know was that Jing Pochin had already fed every one of their proclamations into Ethan's private simulator, an ultra-high-definition 3D rendering that laid bare each nuance of their grandstanding. Ethan only shrugged. Let them boast. He was on top of the world right now, though he knew every peak had its precipice. People needed stability, he reflected. But it was no surprise they were momentarily stunned. They were so used to flattering the powerful and never facing real opposition. Giving them a moment to collect themselves made perfect sense. At that moment, Tony walked in, his stride confident. He stopped in front of Ethan, eyes bright with curiosity and something like excitement. "Seriously," Tony said, leaning against the console, "you're actually going to start colonizing Mars?" "You have to understand how critical this is, Ethan." Tony's brow was furrowed as he stared across the workshop at Ethan. Even the strongest man on Earth, invincible as he might be, wasn't immune to human frailty. And no power, however absolute, could shield someone from the full weight of the world's scrutiny. Sooner or later, mistakes would surface, psychologists and academics would swarm in with their analyses, and Ethan would find himself the target of relentless study and criticism. Tony couldn't bear the thought of leaving him to face that storm alone. Ethan leaned back, folding his arms with a confident half-smile. Relax, Tony. I know exactly what I'm doing. Tony took a step forward. No, you don't. How are you even planning to colonize Mars? You can't just wave a hand and teleport people there. Do you think your employees will drop everything and follow you to a red desert millions of miles away? They'll expect food, medical care, schools for their kids, decades worth of support. And you can't rely on Earth when you're trying to be self-sufficient on another planet. For a moment, Ethan's cool demeanor wavered. Then he checked himself, nodding as if Tony's concerns simply confirmed the magnitude of the challenge ahead. Tony felt a rush of excitement. He knew no one better than Ethan how to turn impossibility into reality, but that didn't mean he wouldn't need every ounce of preparation, planning, and yes, backup to pull it off. All right, Ethan said quietly, meeting Tony's gaze. Let's go over the logistics, right from the top. Tony's tension melted into action. This was exactly the kind of impossible puzzle he lived for. Together, they set to work on humanity's boldest venture yet, turning a lifeless planet into a new home. Tony studied Ethan quietly, a familiar ache in his chest. He saw himself in the young man's bright eyes, once brash and impatient, convinced that anything possible should be done at once. Tony had paid dearly for that attitude, and he refused to let Ethan make the same mistakes. Listen, Ethan, he said softly. Slow down. Talk to some people. Let me help you. I promise your autonomy won't be compromised. They're only after a slice of the pie. This isn't like a corporate merger or a stock deal where any outsider can waltz in. Here we still have control. Ethan's expression didn't waver. After a long moment, he said, You claim you've already solved the resource and population problems. How exactly did you do it? Did you somehow conjure matter out of nothing? Tony gave a rueful smile. He hadn't expected to have all the answers, even though he'd seen the preliminary results himself. It's not magic, he began, choosing his words with care. We're dealing with advanced atomic restructuring, maybe full mass energy conversion, or it could be precise molecular reassembly. Fusion-based synthesis is another possibility. He paused, rubbing his temple. Honestly, I'm still nailing down the exact mechanism, but I have the data. It works, and if you charge in without understanding the risks, you'll trigger consequences you can't imagine. Ethan let that sink in, the challenge flickering in his eyes, giving way to consideration. Tony leaned forward, determined. You don't have to do this alone. Let me help you. The world's on the brink of something unprecedented, but only if we do it right. Ethan's voice was calm but unwavering. Don't think of it as technology. What I'm doing isn't science, it's magic. Tony stared across the table, trying to process what he'd just heard. Reality manipulation? Atomic fusion? He knew the reality gem could bend the world's rules, but straight-up molecular alchemy? Absurd. Magic? He repeated, incredulous. Ethan raised a single finger. Watch. He focused, and a beam of pale light sprang from his fingertip, striking the battered oak tabletop. The wood shivered and dissolved in a cascade of glowing motes. Where the table had been, there now sat a pyramid of perfectly browned cheeseburgers, steam curling up from each one. Tony's eyes widened until they threatened to pop out of his head. What is this? Is this some kind of projection trick? Ethan shook his head with a faint smile. It's real enough. Go on. Try one. I promise it'll taste better than any burger you've ever had. Warily, Tony picked up the topmost cheeseburger. The bun was soft, the cheese melted to an ideal goo, the scent savory and rich. He bit in and paused mid-smash, startled by the explosion of flavor. Ethan settled back in his chair, watching Tony's expression shift from skepticism to delight. See? He said quietly. No tech, just magic. Ethan took a careful bite, every bit the scientist in his methodical approach. The gravy was rich and juicy, the bun soft yet springy, and the cheese melted perfectly, its flavor unexpectedly delightful. After decades of hunting down the ultimate cheeseburger, Ethan had assumed nothing could ever exceed his high standards. Yet this creation surpassed them all. Tony sat back, nearly speechless. Does magic really exist? He asked, eyes wide. It does, Ethan replied, setting his napkin aside. But mastering it isn't simple. Your first step is to find Kamartaj. He didn't sugarcoat the journey. According to myth, Tony might one day rise as a supreme mage, but only if the Ancient One willed it. Without her blessing, no seeker could ever locate Kamartaj, no matter how determined. Tony jotted down the name Kamartaj, his mind buzzing with curiosity. Magic, it seemed, was more real and more within reach than he'd ever imagined. Chapter 206. The Power of Unrestrained Growth. Tony stared dubiously at the cheeseburger in his hand. What happens if this magic spreads? He asked. Science is one thing, but magic as a governing system for physical matter, could it really become science someday? That's just theoretical. We still have to deal with resources. Are you seriously planning to turn Martian soil into food? Ethan looked amused, as if he'd read Tony's thoughts. Don't worry. When matter changes form, it's a complete transformation. Once soil becomes a burger, it stays a burger. It won't revert unless you develop seamless matter-energy conversion technology, and we're nowhere near that yet. Tony chewed thoughtfully, then pressed on. All right, but how do you plan to solve the population problem? Mars isn't exactly overpopulated. Leaning back, Ethan's eyes gleamed with conviction. I've already compiled the genetic material of thousands of candidates. Tony's eyebrows shot up. You're talking about clones. Exactly, Ethan replied. Mars has far fewer laws and regulations than Earth. Here, we can pioneer new methods of human reproduction without bureaucratic red tape. I call it the New Human Project. Tony swallowed hard. The implications were staggering and perfectly in line with Ethan's brand of bold ambition. Ethan paused, letting his words sink in. Once we tweak their genes, the next generation of humans will be far stronger than any people alive today. Tony frowned, uncertainty flickering across his face. He'd always trusted Ethan's vision, but this was a bold claim. After a moment, he asked, Is this improvement a result of the compound? Ethan nodded. Exactly. That compound has given me unprecedented insight into human physiology. With the data I've gathered, I'm confident the New Human Initiative will succeed. So you've been gathering genetic data all along? Tony pressed. Realization dawned on him. This plan wasn't something Ethan had just conceived. It had roots in the earliest drafts of the Mars colonization project and the New Human Initiative. Ethan gave a rueful smile. In a way, yes, my original goal was to guide humanity into its next evolutionary phase, together. But when I proposed it, the U.S. government pulled rank and branded it too dangerous. They wouldn't listen. It taught me a hard lesson. Good intentions don't always translate into acceptance. People don't always want help. Tony shook his head. This world, it's set up that way. Ethan's eyes were steady. Maybe, but I'm done waiting for permission. If humanity won't evolve itself, then I'll create a new world on my own terms. Tony studied him for a long moment. Finally, he said, If you need any support, anything at all, come to me first. Ethan's expression softened. And the same goes for you, Tony. They exchanged a firm nod, two allies bound by a shared, defiant dream of a stronger future. Ethan had never been a fan of Tony's colorful language, but over time the two had become unlikely friends, and Ethan had grown surprisingly fond of him. One afternoon, half joking, he leaned back in his chair and said, Mind if I drop by your place and exercise my feudal right of the first night? Tony just laughed. You've got to be kidding. We aren't living in the Middle Ages. Feigning indignation, Ethan shot back. I thought you wanted to be king someday, with all the medieval privileges that go with it. Tony waved him off, still grinning. No thanks. Vulgar customs aren't exactly my style. Ethan watched him go, then drifted into thought about Chelan. It had been far too long since he'd visited that other world. If it weren't for the strange time differential between here and Chelan, he'd have to juggle day and night shifts just to keep up. But with the Empire's affairs now almost entirely entrusted to Jingvatron, he could afford a break. Jingvatron, ever the playful genius, had just discovered it could access the supreme wisdom and was practically buzzing with excitement. Rumor even said it was planning to create a physical body for itself. After witnessing how Jingvatron once managed to break free from the dragon's heavy safeguards and materialize beside Ethan, he knew better than to underestimate the risks of unchecked scientific ambition. Still, for the moment at least, the Empire was in safe hands, and Ethan could finally turn his attention back to Chelan. Jingvatron would never settle for second best. What he desperately needed was Ethan's unique genetic blueprint to construct his own perfect body, but Ethan hadn't shed a single cell, nor stored any samples anywhere in this universe. Were anyone bold enough to travel through time to snatch his DNA, they'd be crushed by Ethan himself, who stood guard day and night over his genetic vault. In fact, Every human specimen Ethan had painstakingly prepared, specialized serums, even Hulk blood, was intended as bait for Jingvatron. Yet the mechanical warlord dismissed them all. He hungered only for Ethan's own code, and there was simply no way to capture it. Ethan refused to relinquish a single scrap of himself, and even Jingvatron's most advanced nanobots could not evade Ethan's hyperacute super senses. Frustration drove Jingvatron to seek out the pinnacle of genetic mastery, a civilization famed for cultivating super soldiers. His quest took a decisive turn when Ethan, in an unguarded moment, named a Shi'ar Empire warrior nearly his equal in power. The warrior's name was Dujian, a member of an extraordinary race whose strength came frighteningly close to Ethan's own. That revelation sent a shudder through Jingvatron's circuits, stoking both his unease and his obsession. The Dragon Force would never betray Ethan, nor could it. Now that Ethan had bound its power to his own, every attempt it made to gauge his strength threatened to overload it. Each morning, Jingpochin arrived to the same astonishing scene. Ethan's power had grown again overnight. By the second day, Jingpochin joked that Ethan could probably knock yesterday's version of himself clean off his feet with a single punch. What was even more remarkable was Ethan's control. Such boundless power could have spelled disaster, yet he'd never once smashed something unintentionally. The Dragon Force raged within him like a caged tempest, and still he wielded it with precision. And strength wasn't the only thing increasing. One by one, new superhuman abilities flickered to life around him. Some felt eerily like Mystique's shape-shifting, cell-by-cell transformations, but Ethan saw through them all. He'd learned to recognize the atomic blueprint of every person he met, and no matter how skilled the illusionist, their soul left a signature he could read at a glance. So each day brought fresh wonders and fresh questions. How far could this runaway evolution go, and what would Ethan do once he'd tapped its farthest limits? Only time, and the Dragon Force itself, would tell. Ethan wasn't just some version of Silver Superman. He was a Kryptonian, and that meant he could manifest virtually any superpower he wanted. So why had his abilities suddenly skyrocketed? Had he somehow spliced his Kryptonian DNA with the feral strength of Doomsday and the raw power of Broly? Or had the energy of 3 Infinity Stones rewritten his very genes? Both theories seemed equally plausible. After all, when Captain Marvel absorbed the cosmic cube, he was transformed entirely. If Ethan really had soaked up the remaining Infinity Stones, he might not call himself Silver Superman, but he'd be every bit as unstoppable as a Super Kryptonian. Tony Stark had slipped away without so much as a goodbye. Shrugging off the thought, Ethan closed his hand around the space stone. A swirling portal opened before him. With a steady breath, he stepped through, and in an instant, emerged at his intended destination. That was the beauty of the space gem. Travel anywhere in the universe, in the blink of an eye. No sooner had Ethan's feet touched solid ground than a tall figure detached himself from the shadows and strode forward to greet him. Chapter 207, determined to strengthen himself. Ethan stood at the entrance to Kamatage, the great hall bathed in the glow of bright orange robes and the smooth, radiant crowns worn by the Celtic priestesses. At the center of it all was Supreme Mage Gu, the Ancient One, her bald head gleaming like polished marble. Her calm, blue eyes met his. "Welcome to Kamatage, Mr. Ethan," she said, her voice both gentle and powerful. "I have sensed your arrival, and your purpose. What do you seek here?" Ethan returned her smile, conviction steady in his gaze. "Supreme Mage, I could not leave this world without first meeting you. I wish to learn the magic of Kamatage, not to beg power from some dimensional demon god, but to master these arts and forge my own path." A faint smile curved Gu's lips. "Kamatage opens its doors to any true seeker. Come, follow me." Without hesitation, Ethan fell into step behind her as she led him through marble corridors alive with the hum of mana. Crystalline arches pulsed with raw energy, and every footstep echoed with centuries of magical tradition. Here, in this sanctuary, Ethan's ambition burned brighter than ever. He had come neither as a pawn nor as a parasite. His goal was simple: to absorb the teachings of Kamatage, adapt its spells, and then innovate, melding its system of power with his own vision. In this school, magic was more than mere incantations. It was a harnessing of inner energy that could bend reality, slipping into invisibility, projecting searing beams of force, phasing through solid matter, extending one's lifespan, casting illusions or enthralling the mind, summoning protective shields, transforming elements through alchemy, telekinetically moving distant objects, teleporting across space, and even between realms. Breathing deeply, Ethan felt the potential thrumming around him. Within these halls of ancient wisdom, he would not only strengthen himself, he would redefine what magic could be. In the world of Kamar-Taj, magic has existed since time immemorial. Magical energy doesn't dwell in our physical realm. Instead, sorcerers draw it in through arcane channels that bridge other dimensions. The adepts of Kamar-Taj practice white magic, a benevolent art granted by the triple deity Vishanti, while reckless practitioners who covet greater power turn to demonic realms and risk corruption. Even the mighty Doctor Strange has, on occasion, tapped infernal sorceries, most notably during his battle with Thanos. One afternoon, Ethan found himself escorted by the Supreme Mage, the Ancient One, into the library's hidden sanctum. Shelves soared toward the vaulted ceiling, their bookshelves carved from living wood and inscribed with alien glyphs. Pausing before a massive oaken desk, the Ancient One spoke softly. "You may remain here and study for as long as you stay in Kamar-Taj." With that, she turned and glided away, her expression inscrutable. Perhaps, having glimpsed the strands of time with the time stone, she foresaw that Ethan meant only to learn, that his exceptional mind would not tempt him toward darker arts. Ethan, for his part, hungered to refine every ounce of his intellect. He respected magic's dangers, but believed that, with careful study, even its most perilous secrets could be mastered without moral compromise. By contrast, Superman, though virtually invulnerable in most battles, has never addressed his glaring weakness against magic. He endures that vulnerability rather than seek out a remedy. Ethan, however, vows to leave no flaw unchallenged. Ethan had always trusted his intellect, so when he decided to learn magic, he assumed it would be a breeze. He opened a beginner's manual on magical theory and quickly skimmed its first lesson. The simplest form of sorcery is light invocation, the very first discipline Doctor Strange mastered. Every spell, the text explained, relies on intricate glyphs drawn in glowing strands of magical energy. With a steady hand, Ethan traced a swift sigil in the air. Before him, a perfect orb of amber light bloomed and hovered, steady and bright. "Understood," he said, nodding. In mere seconds, Ethan absorbed the principle. Within half an hour, he'd progressed from untrained novice to a practicing mage. Next, he turned to the Book of the Waishan Emperor, the cornerstone grimoire of Kamar-Taj. It delves into white magic, a discipline whose toll on the practitioner is far lighter than the demands of other interdimensional arts. That said, there is still a price to pay. When a Kamar-Taj mage dies, their soul and power are reclaimed by the Vishanti. Only one sorcerer ever evaded that fate, the Ancient One. By allying herself with the Eternal One, she transcended mortality, her power placing her alongside the Waishan Emperor, one of the three primordial guardians of humanity's mystical heritage. Kamar-Taj's entire training system can be traced back to Agamotto himself. Over the centuries, many adepts who tapped its power lost themselves, their souls merging into the entity now called the Waishan Emperor. Yet the mystics of Kamar-Taj have never balked at the price. Through magic, they enjoy long, healthy lives, and when death comes, their remaining strength willingly returns to the Emperor as the cost of a lifetime's practice. By contrast, other interdimensional sorcerers pay their tribute even in life, and, upon death, their souls are ripped away by demons of the dark dimension, becoming lodestones through which those fiends breach our world. They resist that form of magic at every turn. "He's learning so fast," Mordo whispered, watching the boy across the chamber. He and Supreme Mage Gu Yi, whom everyone simply called the Ancient One, had come to observe Ethan's progress. From the moment he first opened the dusty grimoire, after only a couple of shaky attempts at spellcasting, he had abandoned any premature evocation of power and devoted himself wholly to study. The Ancient One closed her eyes, fingers tracing invisible sigils in the air. Subtle currents of arcane energy swirled around Ethan, layers of magic that were not his own. Asgardian runes flickered faintly at his pulse points. Elsewhere, she detected echoes of the Warner Protoss ancient rites. "A remarkable confluence of auras," she murmured. "If he continues like this, in a century he could stand among the Supreme Mages himself." Mordo glanced at her, awaiting more, but the Ancient One's face grew grave. "I have also seen darker possibilities," she admitted quietly. "Shadows that tell of a destiny far more perilous, one that could transform him into the demon god of the dark dimension." She opened her eyes. In their depths lay both hope and warning, for in magic, as in all things, the path ahead is shaped by choice, and for Ethan, the choices he makes now may decide the fate of more worlds than he can yet imagine. Ethan's plan was daring in the extreme. With Kamar-Taj's aid, he would pinpoint the exact coordinates of the dark dimension, breach its threshold, and consume Dormammu himself. In another possible future, he'd gone even further, mastering every branch of the mystic arts and stealing the Eye of Agamotto. That timeline, by and large, had turned out well. Yet Ethan chose not to follow it now. He knew why. Any magic beyond the humble radiant arts demanded a soul-binding contract, a pact forged with the interdimensional demons of the Abyss, led by the formidable Emperor Waishan. Those demons treated contracts like water and sunlight. The mortals who signed them were seeds, and the harvested souls were the fruit that nourished their power. Ethan wanted magic on his own terms, drawn from his own life force. He dreamed of building a new system of sorcery, a community of mages loyal only to him, whose collective devotion and energy would feed his spells. In effect, he would recreate the demon's feedback loop, but without surrendering his soul. Someday, perhaps, he might ascend fully into something beyond human, even into demonhood itself. Now, deep in Kamar-Taj's hidden archive, Ethan sank into a leather-bound armchair. Lantern light danced across rows of tomes about interdimension, ley lines, demonic hierarchies, and the ancient runes used to chart unreachable realms. The musty fragrance of parchment and binding glue filled the air. Tonight, he would cross-reference every fragment of lore, comparing Dreamweaver's cartography with the Forbidden Grimoire's theories on pocket universes, until he held the dark dimension's coordinates in his mind. And once that was done, nothing would stand between him and Dormammu's essence. He opened the first volume and let the words wash over him. The seeds of his new magic system were being sown, and from them he would harvest power untold, on his own terms. Ethan slipped into the hushed depths of Kamar-Taj's library, where candlelight danced across row upon row of ancient tomes. He'd come here to master the arcane and to track down the dark book. Though S.H.I.E.L.D. was said to hold the only known copy, he couldn't rule out the possibility that Kamar-Taj itself might be harboring the forbidden volume. The very thought set his teeth on edge. He paused before a low shelf of demonology texts. Syson's dark book had been woven from the fabric of the multiverse, a creation so warped that it defied natural law. It wasn't the only grim work in existence. Old West, the legendary progenitor of black magic, had outwitted mortals and immortals alike. Even Dormammu, Lord of the Dark Dimension, had once begged to borrow Old West's power. But Ethan had no intention of following that twisted path. He was driven by curiosity and scholarship, not by a lust for illicit might. Flipping through the margins of a battered grimoire, Ethan reminded himself why he wouldn't attempt to read every volume in the collection. Some books were labyrinths of ink and blood, endless scripts that fed on the reader's will. Worse still, their pages exhaled the stench of dimensional demons, tainting any mind brave enough to linger too long. Ethan had already felt that corruption rising in his own aura, a subtle hum of otherworldly energy that clung to him like a second skin. He closed the book gently. He'd seen too much to be naive, and though he'd yet to cast a single spell, the mechanics of eldritch sorcery were etched into his mind. There was no turning back now. His quest for the Dark Book would test every ounce of his resolve and challenge the very boundaries between light and shadow. Chapter 208, Magic Floods. The dimensional demon was more terrifying than most could imagine. Many believed that mere observation, seeing its power, hearing tales of it, even thinking about it, would leave them unharmed. In truth, the moment one's mind touched that otherworldly force, the demon's taint marked them. Sorcerers in Kamar-Taj rarely lingered in the library's forbidden wing. Too great a dose of that raw power could draw them in, addict their wills, and let the demon's influence erode them from within. "Does he actually show reverence for power?" Mordo whispered, eyes fixed on Ethan as the young sorcerer gently closed the ancient grimoire and set it aside. A part of Mordo had expected the temptation to be too great, to see Ethan drown in the sea of magic and lose himself. In truth, Mordo had been testing him. If Ethan couldn't resist the lure of unbridled magic, Kamartaj would declare him unworthy. But Ethan, knowing he would soon leave Earth entirely, wasn't about to give Mordo the satisfaction of catching him in a moment of weakness. The Ancient One, however, remained perfectly composed. Through the eye of Agamotto, she had already witnessed the majority of Ethan's future and understood precisely the choice he would make here. There was no surprise in his restraint, only the quiet certainty of foresight. Though Ethan had refrained from further study, he did not immediately depart the library. He sat, lost in thought, as if weighing that single decision against all that had come before. 5 days later, he rose, stepped out of the library, and left Kamartaj behind for good. The Ancient One barely noticed as Ethan restored every single volume to its proper place in the library. With his enhanced mind, he could recall the exact location of each book, sparing Mordo the tedious task of reshelving them himself. Little did they realize, however, that Ethan had slipped in one extra tome among the rows of arcane texts, the Book of Ethan. Bound in cracked black leather and inscribed with his own name, this was no ordinary grimoire. Inside, Ethan had laid out the terms of a binding contract by which any sorcerer could tap into his unique magical energies, spells he had conceived and refined. Even Kamartaj's most seasoned adepts, backed by the all-seeing eye of Agamotto, would find it difficult to unravel or nullify such an agreement once signed. But for now, Ethan's endeavor was purely experimental. His conditions were straightforward. Anyone who invoked his power must honor their debt during their mortal lifetime, and the obligation could not be transferred or assumed by another. After all, even the Supreme Sorcerer herself offers no loopholes. No one shortcuts the Ancient One's exacting standards. And so Ethan waited, curious to see whether any unsuspecting mage might dare to call upon the secrets inscribed in the Book of Ethan. Ethan had learned to tap directly into the Dark Dimension's energies, not only to sustain his immortality, but to halt any hint of aging. In doing so, he quietly evaded the massive debts owed to the Vishanti and to Dormammu himself. Instead of paying, he redirected Dormammu's obligations onto lesser demons of other planes, ensuring they'd clash when the time came to collect. If the demons triumphed, they'd be saddled with Dormammu's debts. If they failed, they'd fall even deeper into arrears. That gambit drove home a simple truth: never leave a loophole in a magical contract. From then on, Ethan forged every pact with absolute precision. His standard deal exchanged 13 units of power for 9 in return, and if a debtor couldn't make good, their very soul would serve as collateral. He'd watched Stephen Strange build an entire league of sorcerers to help shoulder his cosmic debts, yet pay a steep price all the same. Strange's body had given in to bizarre organ afflictions, ailments with a strange, sentient awareness that whispered to him but could never be cured. Miserable as it was, Strange could claim little sympathy. He had rushed into spells without due caution. Before taking his now leave, the Ancient One had bequeathed him an enchanted talisman to absorb future arcane costs, on the one condition that he no longer wielded magic recklessly. Ethan smirked at the lesson. Power must always come with a contract so airtight that even a god couldn't worm his way out, and from now on, his agreements would be unforgiving. Stephen had no choice but to rely on magic for the simplest errands, walking, shopping, because his old covenant simply couldn't shoulder the toll. The curse that bound him to magic was insidious, leaving him perpetually ill. Ethan, by contrast, was driven by compassion. To him, the trappings of flesh and the ebb and flow of raw energy meant nothing, only the soul truly mattered. He insisted that those who bargained with him surrender their souls alone. He had no use for their life force. "I could found my own order," he mused one evening, flicking through the heavy pages of his newest creation. He had modeled this grimoire on the legendary Book of Vishanti, cataloging every ritual, binding formula, and classification of spell. His vision was bold, to distribute it as widely as the Necronomicon or the Golden Book of the Sun. Each copy would require a living touch to awaken its power, forging an unbreakable link between mage and manuscript. Before long, every practitioner would need and possess a copy. But naming it the Ethan Codex felt reckless. Such blatant ambition might draw the Ancient One's wrath. After a moment's thought, he crossed out the title and penned in a new one, The Book of Celestial Light. After all, what greater great light of heaven exists than the sun itself? Ethan's magic, half shadow, half radiance, didn't slow him down. Late afternoon in a narrow New York alley, he spotted a terrified man backed into a corner by a trio of snarling goons. Without hesitation, Ethan thrust out his hand and whispered the incantation. A fireball flared to life in his palm, streaked forward, and engulfed the thugs in an instant. When the smoke cleared, only ashes remained. He stepped closer to the trembling man and asked softly, "Do you crave power?" The stranger's wide eyes betrayed his panic. "What is this?" he stammered, then bolted down the street without another word. Ethan straightened, shaking his head. "No ambition," he murmured. "No deal." Over the following weeks, Ethan wandered every borough of New York, offering 3 copies of the Book of Great Light of Heaven to those he deemed worthy. His first recipient was Wilson Fisk, known in the underworld as the Kingpin. Ethan believed Fisk's iron will and vast network of enforcers could become the foundations of a new magical fraternity. The book's spells didn't require the holder to clutch it constantly. They could be cast at any distance once the contract was sealed. But carrying the tome bestowed powerful boons: accelerated incantation speed, the ability to cast 2 spells at once, a heightened chance of magical critical strikes, rapid mana recovery. Ethan had already infused each volume with a surplus of arcane energy. No holder would ever run dry. Of course, the deeper one tapped into that power, the faster one's life force would ebb. But for a mind hungry to shape the world, it was a price well worth paying. And with each signed contract, the book's bond extended beyond a single user. Whole cells of sorcerers could draw on its magic as though it were their own, laying the groundwork for an empire built on sorcery and overseen by Ethan himself. America's simmering chaos made it the perfect breeding ground for Ethan's plan. He had already slipped 2 of the forbidden spellbooks into the hands of a pair of ruthless, power-hungry operatives. He'd hoped to offer one to Mrs. Gao. He admired the hand's beasts and their uncanny abilities, but she was out of the country. Resigned, he turned his attention elsewhere, casually planting a few more grimoire among Baga's and Sheba's followers. They, too, were only too willing to claim the dark knowledge. No sooner had the last book changed hands than an unprecedented wave of mutations ripped across America. Esheald was already stretched to the breaking point with lizardmen incursions and werewolf outbreaks. Now, every major city reported a fresh crop of mutants, each one boasting wildly different powers, as if plucked from every corner of myth and nightmare. In the heart of the sealed helicarrier, Director Alexander Pierce sat before a thick, leather-bound volume. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes widening. "You're telling me this is a magic book that, just by signing a contract, lets someone learn spells and manifest abilities?" Crossbones, Brock Rumlow, leaned forward, practically vibrating with excitement. Beside him, the man known only as Bald Glasses nodded emphatically. "Exactly, sir. That explains the sudden spike in superpowered incidents in New York and in Baga's and Sheba's territories." Pierce closed his eyes for a moment, taking in the implications. So these grimoires are turning ordinary people into, well, whatever they want to become. Rumlow's grin was all the answer he needed. The director's jaw tightened. America wasn't just in chaos. Now the very laws of nature were unraveling. And somewhere out there, Ethan was watching it all unfold. Ethan paused, uncertainty flickering in his eyes, before gingerly opening the ancient grimoire. The moment the pages parted, a warm, radiant energy surged through him, filling every fiber of his being. In his mind, a resonant voice asked one simple question. Would he pledge himself to the supreme, omniscient, and all-powerful entity known as the Great Light Sky? If he agreed, that unimaginable power would become his. Chapter 209, Magic Book Wholesale. Pierce's vision tore apart in a blaze of light. A colossal sun flared into existence, casting rays into an endless horizon of brilliance. In that vast, incandescent expanse, he felt impossibly small. "Sir?" Sitwell's voice cut through the radiance, yanking him back to the dim study. The light vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving only the soft glow of a single lantern. Pierce pressed his palms to his temples, disappointment and wonder warring in his chest. "What?" Was that?" he muttered. As one of the agency's top double agents, Pierce was used to keeping his cool under pressure, yet nothing in his training had prepared him for that overwhelming surge of power. If all it took was signing a contract, could he really claim that strength? "The owner of this grimoire goes by the name Great Light Tomorrow," Sitwell explained. His tone was serious, almost reverent. "Who is he?" Pierce asked. Brow furrowed. "A descendant of Asan," Sitwell replied, lowering his voice. "He channels genuine divine energy, far beyond the parlor tricks of stage magicians. This is the real deal." Pierce's pulse quickened. "And how do I gain this power?" Sitwell opened the ancient tome. The pages seemed to hum with latent magic. "Recite the binding oath from these pages. Once you've pledged yourself, you'll forge a contract with Great Light Tomorrow. His power will flow into you, and you'll be able to unleash every spell recorded in this book." Pierce stared at the grimoire, its arcane script shimmering in the lamplight. The promise of such power was staggering and terrifying. Yet as an agent accustomed to seizing every advantage, he knew what he had to do next. "Using this, we can create entire legions of enhanced mutants, sir." Rumlow's voice rang with barely contained excitement. Anyone who'd witnessed the book's power up close would understand why it was impossible to ignore. Had those who first uncovered it not defected, joining forces with the lizard men and werewolves to rob banks, they might never have unlocked its true potential. Ethan set down his pen. "Sign the contract." He opened the tome of illumination. Its cover gleamed like burnished gold, yet felt as soft as silk. The pages looked spun from pure light, each glyph embossed into the surface. Though the script was unreadable by any known standard, its meaning unfurled in Ethan's mind as though whispered directly to him. "Sir," Sitwell reported, adjusting his glasses, "this is Hydra's chance to rise. I've traced records indicating this is only one of several such volumes." Ethan's brow lifted. "Several? How many more are there?" Sitwell tapped a dossier. "At least 3 others, each containing unique rituals and arcane secrets. If Hydra can secure them all, our power could become absolute." Ethan leaned back, letting that reality sink in. With every new book they seized, the world would tremble, and Hydra would be the one to set off the storm. "Hydra Command Center, late night. This relic belongs to Hydra. We have to seize it all," Pierce snapped, eyes hard in the dim light of the war room. "Yes, sir." Lecter Rumlow saluted and hurried off. He'd coveted the inhuman gifts of men like Ethan for years, and now, armed with a chance to master real magic, he could hardly contain his excitement. Pierce leaned forward. "Keep it quiet. I don't want Director Fury sniffing around this operation." He flipped through the ancient pages of the Book of the Great Light Tomorrow, scanning its arcane symbols. "Rest assured, sir," Agent Sitwell said, watching over Pierce's shoulder. "Nick Fury doesn't even know we have this book." A few blocks away, Ethan Keller's apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Then came a firm knock at the door. He opened it to find 2 figures in crisp S-Shield uniforms, a tall man and a shorter woman, flanking a portable display case. "Mr. Keller," the man began, voice smooth, "we've been authorized to request your assistance on a highly classified matter." Ethan studied them coolly. Something about their posture was off, too stiff. He frowned. "You 2 aren't human." The woman's eyes flickered. "We're special agents. S-Shield." Ethan crossed his arms. "Your uniforms might say SHIELD, but your musculature and bone structure don't match any Earthborn physiology I've ever seen." A beat of silence. Behind their practiced calm, panic spiked in their eyes. Their mission, whatever it was, just got a lot more complicated. Ethan closed the door a crack. "Nice try. Now, who are you really, and what do you want with me?" The would-be agents exchanged a desperate glance. This was no longer an invitation, it was a life-or-death gamble, and Ethan, having survived too many of those, was already calculating his next move. Even if you can alter your appearance down to the cellular level, your biology will still differ from that of Earthlings. Ethan shook his head. At his words, the 2 figures abandoned their masquerade and reverted to their true forms. He regarded them with keen interest. Real Skrulls. In the annals of the galaxy, the Skrull Empire had once been one of the 3 great interstellar powers before its fall at the hands of the Kree. Renowned for their shape-shifting, Skrulls could flawlessly imitate other races, mimicking voice, features, and even body structure. Yet they could never replicate another being's biology exactly. Legends spoke of an even rarer breed among them, the Super Skrull. These exceptional agents could not only assume any form they chose, but also copy the target's superhuman abilities. It was the existence of Super Skrulls that had made their empire so fearsome, though rigorous restrictions kept them from running unchecked. Otherwise, a handful of Super Skrulls might have stolen the Shi'ar Empire's legendary swordsmanship, even in a diluted form, and wielded it to crush the Kree in turn. Ethan leaned back in his chair, eyes never leaving the two Skrull envoys opposite him. Throughout history, Captain Marvels have been exceptionally powerful, but far too few to tip the scales in a blade-for-blade war, he said. On Earth, mutation rates are low. In the Kree Empire, they're off the charts. That's why their only real super soldiers are Captain Marvel herself and the handful of Marvel Corps operatives. Now imagine if we could isolate and mass-produce a downgraded version of the Blade Follower prototype, just enough to grant Skrulls Super Skrull abilities. 2 enhanced Skrulls, deployed correctly, could obliterate an entire Kree fleet. One of the Skrulls exchanged a glance with his companion. Surely, you don't think Super Skrulls only appear once every 1,000 years, he countered. The Empire's been around far longer than that. There must have been dozens. Ethan nodded. Precisely, which makes your request today all the more interesting. He stood and beckoned them closer. You're not here just to haggle over Martian real estate. You came about joining the Mars immigration program, didn't you? The senior Skrull hesitated, then answered, Yes, Mr. Grant. Sorry, Ethan. We wish to participate in the first wave. Good, Ethan replied, folding his arms. Welcome to the show. As the broadcast directors counted down from 10, the Skrulls realized they were part of the galaxy's most watched spectacle, a grand PR stunt as hollow as it was mesmerizing. But Ethan's words were real, and so was the power they all coveted. Ethan had dealt with his fair share of odd allies and outright villains, but nothing struck him quite like the Skrulls and their handler, Nick Fury. From the outside, they all looked sharp, high-tech gear, ironclad promises, but underneath, they lacked the one thing that mattered, a solid plan. Take the Skrulls' infamous secret invasion. It was an unmitigated disaster, a sprawling conspiracy that collapsed under its own weight. And really, it shouldn't have come as a surprise. At their core, the Skrulls had one simple goal, a place to call home and a true identity of their own. So they signed on with Fury, carrot on a stick, planet-sized version. Even Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel herself, got in on it. She vowed to scour the universe for a world where the Skrulls could settle. Fury, ever the opportunist, promised to throw S.H.I.E.L.D.'s might behind the search. In practice, though, he merely turned them into expendable assets, dangling the dream of a new world to keep them loyal. He slipped deeper into his own game, addicted to having Skrull operatives at his beck and call. Eventually, the younger generation of Skrulls had enough. The promised haven never materialized, and they revolted. That chain reaction gave birth to the secret invasion fiasco and cemented Fury's reputation as a master manipulator. He was no hero. He was a man drunk on power. Ethan, for his part, had no interest in tangling with Fury's web of half-truths. He was already chasing a far bolder vision, Mars. When the Skrulls showed up on his doorstep, it wasn't to trick him. They'd watched his progress, noted the breakthroughs he'd made in life support systems and habitat design. They believed Ethan's plan wasn't just talk, even if they didn't yet understand how he'd handle food, water, or more than a few million colonists. And so, in the dim light of Ethan's makeshift workshop, the Skrulls looked to him as their best, and perhaps only chance at a home. That was a gamble they were willing to take. We can assist Mr. Ethan by operating covertly in multiple countries. With that, the female Skrull's features rippled and reshaped themselves into a breathtaking visage. Ethan stared in stunned recognition. She'd taken on the likeness of Marilyn Monroe. Chapter 210. Living off old capital will lead to ruin sooner or later. Ethan held his ground as the Skrull woman drifted toward him, every inch the picture of Marilyn Monroe. Platinum curls, ruby lips, that famous, sultry gaze, she was the living embodiment of the silver screen siren. Legend said Monroe had been the most desirable woman on Earth. Now, this alien shapeshifter wore her face to lure him into alliance. Yet Ethan didn't flinch. He knew the Skrulls, gift and their weapon lay in illusion. "I'm not interested in Marilyn Monroe," he said flatly. She paused, invisible barrier halting her advance. Beneath Monroe's mask, her alien eyes flickered. "You underestimate us," she hissed. "As long as you aid the Skrulls, we can make you the happiest man alive." Ethan watched her carefully. "You can only mimic profiles you've already observed," he pointed out. "Ancient beauties, China's 4 beauties, Cleopatra, noble women of the Roman Empire. You lack the originals. You'd have to reconstruct them from scratch, and your restorations always come out distorted." The Skrull's lips curled in mock pity. "We have learned," she whispered. "Now we can conjure any woman on Earth, unbound by prior knowledge." He shrugged. "Then show me someone real, someone with flesh and blood. You'll never fool my senses. My perception isn't human. It demands authenticity down to the cellular level." Her Monroe facade shimmered, wavering between Marilyn's famous grin and a more alien countenance, skin stretching and rippling like liquid. Ethan's resolve held firm. Seduction by fantasy would never cloud his judgment, and he knew that living off borrowed illusions led only to inevitable ruin. "Otherwise, it's nothing more than a defective product," Ethan declared. He paced slowly across the lab, eyes cold and calculating. To him, only the super soldiers from the Grand Seminary, or beings with godlike technology and evolution, were worth his time. True evolution, he insisted, wasn't just about increased strength or new powers. It had to be precise, comprehensive, and utterly flawless. Anything less was simply getting stronger, not genuine evolution. On the far side of the room, the 2 Skrull operatives exchanged a strained glance. Their most reliable tactic, deploying a seductive beauty to distract him, had backfired completely. Ethan sneered at the notion that they hadn't refined her enough. Did they seriously believe they could sculpt perfection on the cellular level? Even advanced Skrull shapeshifters couldn't match the surgical precision of a machine. Ethan stopped and turned to them. "You injected compound number 1 and compound number 2, didn't you?" he asked flatly. The Skrulls hesitated. Under Ethan's unwavering gaze, they realized that if they couldn't deliver true evolution, down to the finest cellular detail, they had nothing to offer him. Ethan paced slowly along the observation window, hands clasped behind his back, as the 2 Skrulls shifted uncomfortably in their containment cells. "I've recreated the Kree formula," he said finally. "I think this will allow you to evolve into a Super Skrull." The Skrull on the left, taller, with dark green skin, exchanged a stunned look with his companion. "Super Skrull? How could you possibly know about that?" Ethan turned, a faint smile playing on his lips. "S.H.I.E.L.D. came into possession of a Kree body. We analyzed every scrap of its DNA, and every piece of secret tech embedded in its cells. That's how I know." The shorter Skrull sneered. "You didn't tell Nick Fury or Captain Marvel. Even she barely believes the Super Skrull program was ever real. If the Kree Empire had managed to finish it, they surely would have used it on us centuries ago." "So why don't they?" Ethan asked, leaning forward. "Because the project was hidden. They never completed it. The serum, what I call compound number 1 and compound number 2, were both evolutionary bioweapons, tuned to rewrite alien physiology. No genetic safeguards. Injected into a Skrull, they could grant you the Kree's power set, energy projection, enhanced strength, accelerated healing." The taller Skrull ran a hand over his brow. "Impossible. You're meddling with the very code of life itself." Ethan's smile widened. "Science will push the impossible into the realm of the inevitable. The question now is simple. Will you accept the injection and become something more than a foot soldier in an endless war?" He paused, watching their faces. "Or will you die as you are, Skrulls in a cage?" Silence fell as they weighed the offer, the hum of the laboratory's ventilation, the only sound in the room. Ethan spoke quietly, his words carrying a weight that made the Skrulls shift in their seats. "Theoretically, you can do more than just alter human DNA. Any animal can be injected to accelerate its intelligence. In fact, there was a recent report from Saudi Arabia about a tiger that received Compound 1. At first, its owner admired the results. The animal's mind rewired itself, its strength and cunning amplified. But it didn't end there. The tiger killed both its master and the man's bodyguard, then broke free into the desert." He paused, letting the grim story settle over the group. Despite the headlines calling it a super tiger, it never became anything more than a tiger, with bigger muscles and a sharper brain. In the end, special forces cornered it, the animal was shot, and, gruesomely, its carcass was served whole at a banquet. That's the fate of most failed experiments on Earth: quick slaughter and disposal. A low hum of shock swept through the hall. The Skrulls clearly had no idea Earth scientists would risk weaponizing wildlife. Ethan leaned forward. If you knew all this already, you wouldn't be so surprised to learn I'm from Earth, or that some humans have committed unspeakable crimes, even sexual violence, against alien beings. But don't mistake that for coordinated leadership. I'm nobody's commander back home. I don't have a government briefing. Not even the Super Skrulls know every detail of human society, and they're the elite among you. What we all understand, though, is that you came here as refugees, fleeing a planet torn by war. You're not invaders, you're survivors. That's why you needed to know what you were up against. Will you lead our group of refugees? The two Skrull envoys implored, standing before him in the red Martian dust. Ethan regarded them coolly. It's pointless to ask me to open Mars to your people, he said. I won't place my colony under alien authority. They fell to their knees, pleading him to reconsider, but Ethan's decision was final. Outsiders, especially an entirely different species, could harbor unpredictable agendas. He refused to risk discord in his settlement. Crestfallen, the Skrulls rose and withdrew into the pale glare of the planet's sky. What they didn't know was that Ethan had already secured samples of their cells and DNA. He remembered how, on old Earth, scientists had used Mystique's genetic code to build Sentinel robots, machines engineered to mimic and even enhance mutant abilities at the molecular level. Each Sentinel could adopt multiple powers, far beyond Mystique's own capabilities. Ethan suspected the so-called Super Skrulls operated on a similar principle of gene-level imitation, and he was well aware that Earth's Sentinels had required genuine X-gene specimens to function. Now, with Skrull genetic material in his labs, he intended to push the technology even further. In his view, the Skrull race had proven itself a weak, expendable resource, one he would exploit to secure Mars's future under his rule. Ethan stood by the broad window, watching the twilight deepen over the city he had helped shape. He remembered how, over centuries, the shapeshifters had come to rely entirely on their gift for transformation, disguise, and infiltration. They had mastered every trade, every uniform, every identity, until the Kree Empire they once served rose up and crushed them. It was the fatal flaw of a people content to dwell in the shadows of their own history, never daring to advance beyond old successes. If Ethan himself had been here, complacent, if, after crossing worlds and awakening to his Kryptonian heritage, he had simply spent his days basking in solar light and letting his strength creep upward at a snail's pace, he would still be bound by limits he could never break. He knew what happened to those who settled for incremental gains. They stagnated, trapped by routines, by the comfort of familiar victories. Instead, Ethan had thrown himself into study, tapping the full potential of his supercharged mind. He had devised new methods to reshape his body, to reforge his very essence. Each transformation pushed him closer to the pinnacle of power he now approached. Tonight marked the culmination of his work, learning arcane magic, integrating it into his physiology, and then, most astonishingly, binding a fragment of an ancient soul within himself. All of that had been completed. The final enchantment lay behind him now. He took a deep breath, feeling the hum of energy coursing through his veins. The city lights flickered below, indifferent to the change stirring in his heart. A ripple of power roiled beneath his skin, as real and solid as muscle, as unyielding as steel. He could feel the magic unfolding, weaving itself into his cells, augmenting his Kryptonian might. "It's time," he whispered, the words more promise than proclamation. He let his gaze sweep over the metropolis, his city, the stage upon which he would reveal his full strength. The last piece was in place. Now he would move forward without hesitation. Ethan turned away from the window and stepped into the room's center. As he did, golden light spilled from his hands, dancing across the floor. The soul-bound spark within him settled, merging with his will. He would no longer be a hidden force. He was ready to stand, to fight, and to reshape the future. Outside, the final glow of dusk vanished. Inside, a new dawn lit Ethan's eyes. Chapter 211, Martian Empire. To master Ethan's magic, one must sign his soul-binding contract. The moment the contract is sealed, the signee's soul belongs entirely to Ethan, and upon death, their soul passes into his possession. Such is the unbreakable force of these rules. No third party can intercept those souls en route to him. Only someone of greater power than Ethan can wrest those souls away from him. A month later, the news that shook the world arrived. Emperor International's Mars colonization plan had become a reality. Overnight, the multinational corporation's Earth headquarters lay eerily deserted, its staff and resources apparently relocated off-planet. Observatories around the globe confirmed it. A sprawling city now stood on the Martian surface. "They actually did it," the pundits murmured. "They've settled Mars." In a secure briefing room, Nick Fury studied the latest high-definition satellite images. Under the red Martian sky, glass and steel towers gleamed in the dust. It was breathtaking and utterly impossible, unless one man had made it happen. Fury turned to Natasha Romanoff, who'd been embedded as a liaison alongside Tony Stark. "Does Stark know what's going on?" he asked. Black Widow nodded. "He's fully briefed. In fact, he's volunteered to go up there and see it for himself." Fury let out a low whistle. "Go to Mars? Just like that?" "This is Stark we're talking about." "What?" Natasha replied coolly. "He wants first-hand data, and maybe a little FaceTime with Ethan." Fury's eyes darkened. FaceTime with Ethan? How did he pull this off? No one's got the resources to build an entire city on Mars, unless there's some kind of magic in play. Natasha met his gaze evenly. Ethan's magic doesn't just bend the rules, it rewrites them. If he's behind this, well, we're all in for a very different kind of space race. With Emperor International's vast resources, there should be a clear trail, recent procurement plans, matching purchase orders, or failing that, evidence of smuggling. Yet nothing adds up. Under that level of satellite surveillance, it should have been impossible to hide any large-scale operation. So the pressing question on everyone's mind was, how did Ethan pull it off? Nick Fury was as baffled as every intelligence chief on the planet. Their satellites had scanned space relentlessly, and still no sign of a spaceship. Instead, orbital imagery revealed a fully formed city on Mars. If not for the specialized observatory monitoring Martian atmospheric gases, nobody might have noticed for months, even years. But the moment analysts saw those precise geometric outlines against the barren landscape, they knew it was man-made and massive. Inside the Pentagon, on Capitol Hill, and in Wall Street boardrooms, top officials were furious. They'd long insisted on total, even interplanetary, oversight. No shipment too small, no resource too remote. Yet here was incontrovertible proof of a clandestine construction project beyond their reach. The only conceivable explanation was that someone on the inside had cut a private deal with Ethan. Fury burned with indignation, not just at the audacity of the operation, but at discovering he'd been excluded from the loop. They were all businessmen, no personal grudges, just profit. And when there was money to be made, nobody wanted to be left out, so they'd called this criticism session, ostensibly to root out the traitor who'd gone behind their backs to reach Ethan. "Who here had the gall to contact him?" one executive barked. "Lar, it's gotta be you. You've lost any shred of American pride." "Are you insane?" Lar shot back. "I'm convinced it's you, Fisk. You control the supplies Ethan needs. You're the one who sold us out. By my family's honor, I swear I had nothing to do with it." Fisk thundered, slamming his fist on the table. "I'm as clueless as you are. It must be one of you schemers." Voices rose to shouting, insults flew, so did a few leather shoes, and every man in the room looked like a self-styled traitor. In reality, they weren't hunting a saboteur to punish him, but to find whoever could smooth the way for future deals with Ethan. And since no such insider existed, the inquiry dragged on fruitlessly. Nick Fury watched them bicker and concluded the obvious. Someone, or maybe more than one person, had quietly approached Ethan already. That was why the true culprit remained nowhere to be found. Ethan couldn't shake his frustration over those shadowy power brokers. Publicly, they proclaimed their project was for the benefit of all mankind, and insisted Ethan had no choice but to stand aside. Behind closed doors, however, they dangled promises of partnership in his face. It was their standard play. Swoop into Hollywood, round up one golden name after another, load them onto trucks like livestock, then parade them before the cameras. They were utterly shameless. Only profit mattered. Prestige was an afterthought. Who were these men pulling the strings? Ethan had no clear answer. He could probably find out, but by now, what would be the point? The plan was already in motion. All Earth could do now was scramble to send another mission to Mars and hope to strike a deal with him directly. Mars itself was still a hostile world, its water reserves all but non-existent, but Ethan had long since solved that problem. By transforming vast stretches of Martian soil and rock into habitable structures, he had unlocked reliable water sources. The next, and most ambitious step, was to begin rebuilding the planet's atmosphere, effectively sealing off any independent expeditions from Earth. Neither Ethan nor the Empire back home cared about saving face. If Earth wanted to land casually on Mars, fine, so long as they acknowledged his authority. Meanwhile, life on the Red Planet had taken root. The first generation of Martian-born children, 1,000 in all, had already arrived, a testament to how far Ethan's vision had come. Under Ethan's policy of unrestricted reproduction, the 1,000 Martians he's already created will soon double in number. Why hasn't he made more? Simply because he's too indifferent to bother. These Martians are only the beginning. Venus is his true destination. Ethan pre-programmed their memories so they believed themselves citizens of a grand Martian empire. Each one stands 2 meters tall, with a body density 5 times that of an Earth human. That difference in physiology, and the absence of any biological force field, makes crossbreeding with Earthlings impossible. Physically, these Martians are idealized humans, towering, graceful, and perfectly proportioned. Their long legs, sculpted features, and flawless figures were designed to match, and even surpass, Earth's standards of beauty. They lack any mechanism for fat storage, so no matter how much they eat, they remain slender. Their genes are locked against degeneration, guaranteeing perpetual physical perfection. But Ethan didn't stop with people. He's also engineered a host of hybrid Martian creatures by splicing in Earth DNA. The result, beasts of incredible power, far stronger and more resilient than anything native to our world. Together, this civilization of perfect humans and supercharged fauna stands ready to be the vanguard of Ethan's grand venture, first on Mars and then onto Venus. Ethan stood alone on a wind-swept Martian plain, crimson dust swirling around him. With a deliberate motion, he pressed his hand into the hard-packed regolith, and in an instant, a vast expanse of water surged across the landscape, transforming 1/3 of Mars's surface into a new ocean. The shockwave rippled through the planet's nascent ecosystem, igniting conflict among rival Martian factions and ensuring the survival of a ruthless, survival-of-the-fittest struggle he knew they needed. Back on Earth, the change was impossible to dismiss. Orbital satellites transmitted images of the unexpected seas in real time, and scientists were left scrambling for explanations. How had so much water appeared overnight? No known technology could account for it. Worse, Ethan's gambit had reminded the world that Hydra was far from defeat. Its remnants, still led by operatives like Black Caesar, were quietly regrouping. To Ethan, however, that was precisely the point. By keeping both allies and enemies off balance, he believed he was forging stronger defenders for whatever came next. In a secure briefing room hidden beneath the streets of New York, Nick Fury studied the Martian images with grim satisfaction. The Avengers might hesitate, but Fury had decided that the time for half measures was over. If the global situation demanded a new kind of shield, then let it be the Illuminati. He'd already begun recruiting Black Widow and Hawkeye, 2 operatives whose loyalty and skill he trusted implicitly. Now he turned to Steve Rogers. Under normal circumstances, Steve would have refused any further biological enhancement. As an American citizen and a symbol of clean living and clear conscience, he rejected chemical shortcuts. But Hydra's resurgence, coupled with the chaos in space, left him little choice. Fury arranged for Steve to receive Compound Number 1, a modified serum designed to complement the original super soldier formula without crossing certain ethical or international lines. To everyone's surprise, especially Rogers's, the 2 serums meshed perfectly, granting him heightened strength and endurance without the unpredictable side effects Fury feared. Standing in Fury's conference room, Captain America clenched and unclenched his fists, feeling the familiar hum of power beneath his skin. He didn't like the idea of a secret cabal, but he knew the world had changed. Hydra was still out there, and now the Martians were fighting. If this new Illuminati could keep Earth safe, if it could even tame Mars, then he would stand with it. Whatever Ethan had unleashed on the Red Planet, humanity would meet the challenge together. It looks like I only received a single sentence rather than the full chapter. Could you please paste the entire passage you'd like me to rewrite? Once I have the complete text, I can rename Luther to Ethan, ensure he's portrayed as male, and deliver a polished, idiomatic English version. Chapter 212. The True Potential of a Space Gem. In the skirmishes that followed, Steve finally reached a genuine 50-50 stalemate with his opponents. While he tested his limits, Ethan turned his attention to the Red Planet itself. Drawing on the incredible power of the space gem, he began remaking Mars's atmosphere from the ground up. Layer by layer, he thickened the air until it became a dense, swirling veil of dust and charged particles. Light from distant stars and passing ships now bent unpredictably as it entered the new Martian skies, and every radio transmission was refracted or absorbed. No conventional sensor could penetrate that turbulent shroud, unless an invader could literally tear the atmosphere apart. But Ethan didn't stop at density alone. He supercharged the dust with static energy, igniting near-constant firestorms that blazed across the planet's surface. Granite rocks the size of trucks hurtled through the air, turning any would-be landing into a high-speed gauntlet. Even the most advanced scientific assault craft would be torn to pieces before they touched down. Only magic or mysticism might bypass such defenses, but Ethan anticipated that too. Channeling the space gem, he wove an invisible barrier around every square inch of Martian territory. As long as an intruder's own spatial skill or raw power remained inferior to the gem's, they simply could not breach it. Not even the dreaded dimensional demons, ruthless interplanar marauders, could force their way in. With Mars now sealed off, Ethan needed no sprawling network of sanctuaries like the ones he had established on Earth. 3 magic nodes, each anchored to an ancient temple, were more than enough to stabilize the barrier. That, he realized, explained the demons' single-minded obsession with Earth. It wasn't that our world was uniquely vulnerable. It was simply the only real prize left they could hope to conquer. And with Mars secured forever by the space gem, their ambitions would have to look elsewhere, or be crushed against an unbreakable wall of Ethan's making. Ethan stared at the readings. Just like Asgard, no force could breach his barrier, and since all 9 worlds were lifeless, invasion had always been pointless. But now, Mars teemed with life, and he knew the dimensional demons would be watching. He couldn't risk them sniffing out the Red Planet's new civilization. That was why Ethan had woven a space-time veil around Mars, one that nullified every spatial ability aimed at it. In truth, the Space Stone possessed the raw power to generate such a shield on its own, but Ethan lacked the mastery to wield it directly. Only Thanos, who'd ventured into the Well of Eternity, truly understood how to synchronize the Infinity Stones. With no other choice, Ethan had forcibly channeled the Power Stone's energy into the Space Stone, charging it enough to raise an impenetrable barrier. Back on Earth, scientists watched in frustration as Mars slipped off their scanners. A brand new atmosphere now cloaked the planet, blocking all telescopes and probes. No one knew what was happening inside the hidden Martian empire. It felt oddly personal, like discovering your neighbor has suddenly grown fabulously wealthy, only to replace every window with one-way glass, leaving you in the dark and unable to ask for a favor. Ethan never imagined he'd feel such a jolt of disbelief. This was Mars, the untapped wealth of an entire planet. In comparison, Earth's richest reserves looked like the coin of paupers. Beggars begging on Mars? An absurdity. And even if Earth's nations dreamed of plundering the Red Planet's resources, they simply lacked the means. Our current space technology can't transport a single soldier there. Humanity may have discovered alien life decades ago, but it never truly committed to advancing its spacefaring capabilities. The idea of sending armies to Mars remains a fantasy. Worse still, the strongest man on Earth has become the strongest man on Mars, Ethan himself. Any American troops ordered to confront him would find their morale evaporating the instant they heard the name Ethan. Yet Ethan's lone exodus to Mars has sparked a fierce pride back on Earth. If one man can conquer an entire world by himself, so the argument goes, then humanity's combined might must surely surpass him. Even Tony felt the surge of that collective confidence, one that whispered Ethan had erred. By abandoning science in favor of magic, Tony believed, Ethan had forsaken any hope of a truly rational solution. Tony, however, was in a league of his own. He insisted on solving every problem with science. It wasn't because he'd spent 3 days and nights in Kamartaj only to have no wizard answer his summons. Ethan had teased him relentlessly about that. Tony's real fascination lay in magic, but he was convinced that the only true way to unravel the universe's secrets was through scientific method. To him, science was the ultimate framework. Even magic, if studied closely enough, would bow to its laws. Ethan could only shake his head and grin. "Tony, you really never stop, do you?" As he thought it through, a spark of inspiration hit Ethan. What if he used the space stone to pinpoint those unclaimed pocket dimensions? That had to be where the dimensional demon was hiding. With the space stone in hand, he could slip out of any territory, claimed or not, safe and sound. And if he discovered a dimension free of ownership, the rewards would be immense. This must be the true power of the space stone, the key to every world, Ethan whispered. He studied the gem's swirling energies in his palm. But even with the stone's power, reaching a realm beyond the known multiverse wouldn't be as simple as flicking a switch. Ethan held the space gem aloft, its facets flickering like distant stars. He had been studying the demon known simply as the dimensional host, an assembly of gods and devils bound outside the material realm, for weeks. Each target was a pocket dimension, Asgard and Jotunheim, the frozen waste of the frost giant's home, the underworld where Hela languished, whispered to be a fragment of the hell dimension itself. Though all lay beyond the real dimension, they differed wildly in their ties to the material plane. Realms like Asgard lay almost adjacent to reality, their borders thin enough for warriors and gods to slay one another in fleeting skirmishes. Others, such as the realms ruled by Dormammu, lurked farther afield, requiring a tether or a portal before they could bleed into our world. Ethan knew the dimensional host yearned to absorb these worlds, to fuse them into its own chaotic dominion, but finding an unclaimed pocket was nearly impossible. A single, ownerless dimension adrift in infinity, locating it was like plucking a single grain of sand from the desert. So Ethan was stunned when the gem suddenly glowed with a pure blue radiance. "Found it? Already?" he muttered, brows rising in disbelief. The gem's light pulsed as if nodding in triumph. Ethan felt the weight of impossibility lift from his shoulders. This small, unassuming gem had just solved the greatest riddle in all creation. Ethan hovered above the drifting continent, the space gem pulsing in his palm. Even with the gem's power, finding a hidden pocket dimension this vast felt like searching for a single grain of sand on an endless beach. But the space gem wasn't just any relic. It embodied the fundamental laws of its home universe, a singularity that no cosmic rule could outmatch. In this reality, its authority was absolute. With a soft hiss, the gem opened a gateway. Ethan stepped through and blinked. The world beyond was barely the size of a modest island. Rolling hills gave way to a crystalline lake, and distant peaks loomed under a pale sky. Yet there was no sign of life, no fortress or hidden temple to claim dominion. "It's unclaimed," he whispered, scanning every ridge and valley. Unlike Dormammu's dark dimension, a formless void of churning energy, this realm was concrete, soil underfoot, fresh air in his lungs. It was, in every respect, a fully formed world. He turned the space gem over in his mend, its light steadying his nerves. If this dimension truly had no master, it could become his sanctuary and his stronghold. But first, he would explore every inch, map its contours, and unlock every secret the island held. With the gem as his guide, Ethan took his first step onto foreign soil, ready to bend this unclaimed world to his will. Ethan leaned forward, excitement dancing in his eyes. Put simply, this dimension offers far greater potential for growth than the energy dimension ever could. He paused, a thoughtful smile spreading across his face. "I don't possess any unique energy of my own," he admitted, "but that's the beauty of perfect rules. I can borrow any rule I need." Chapter 213, The Birth of a Divine Artifact. Ethan settled into his new role with a deep sense of satisfaction. Ever since he had forged his own dimensional space, he knew the advantages it granted him. In an energy dimension, one can draw on an infinite reservoir of exotic forces. In a material dimension, on the other hand, one can tap directly into the realm's intrinsic laws, just as Hela, immortal of Asgard, grows ever stronger by harnessing Asgard's eternal decree. Within the confines of his personal dimension, Ethan held the rank of Demon Lord, an existence that was, for all intents and purposes, omniscient and omnipotent. Even when he stepped beyond his own domain, the bond he shared with that dimension continued to bestow power upon him, though naturally the effect was less profound than when he remained inside. Now, having asserted himself as the sovereign of this material dimension, Ethan felt a sudden flood of new strength. Every law he bent, every rule he twisted, granted him an edge far beyond his previous capabilities. He closed his eyes and flexed his senses, wondering aloud, "Have I at last breached the threshold of single-universe level?" Yet he knew better than to indulge in overconfidence. Even as the lord of a dimension, his power was still too limited to claim true demon status at the scale of a universe. After all, his realm was still in its infancy, too small, too undeveloped to support the full might of a universe-class demon. Turning inward, he began to plan the next steps of his ascension, determined to expand his dominion until no corner of reality lay beyond his reach. Ethan didn't waste a moment. He reached into the material dimension's infinite expanse, and with its omniscience and omnipotence at his command, instantly provisioned himself with a full set of artifact equipment. Normally, crafting such gear would demand painstaking effort, even for someone versed in transformation magic, but Ethan had neither the time nor the inclination. Thanks to the material dimension's unique properties, his new artifacts would retain their full power no matter which world he ventured into. Next, he banished the destroyer armor into the same dimensional vault. The armor bristled with divine energy, from cosmos-shaping Heaven Father deities down to star-class gods, and Ethan was curious to see whether the material dimension could assimilate such a formidable array of power. If it succeeded, it would only grow stronger. He recalled how, moments ago, Thor had been poised to smash the armor, wreathed in the Hellfire gravitational star Hammer's fury, into Mephisto's infernal realm. Ethan had acted in the nick of time, snatching the destroyer armor for closer study and quelling its reactions behind a biological force field. Now, all he could do was hope Odin wouldn't notice the theft. At long last, that hot potato of an opportunity paid off. By combining the two king-class relics, the Eternal Spear and Thor's Hammer, with the power of the destroyer armor, Ethan unlocked the secrets needed to craft the ultimate artifact in true Asgardian fashion. Faced with a delightful dilemma, should he pilot a towering mech or slip into a transforming battlesuit, he chose the latter. After all, nothing thrilled him more than making a grand entrance. Ethan set out to design a suit of artifact-grade armor that turned heads. He gave himself a transparent helmet crafted from Asgardian crystal, strong enough to protect his skull, yet clear enough to leave his face on full display. Opponents would see his expression, assume his head was vulnerable, and promptly regret their mistake. Though it was called armor, this was as much a work of art as it was a defensive shell. A simple cloak felt too pedestrian. Ethan insisted on ornamental wings sweeping from his back. Wings, he decided, were the only fitting finisher. Drawing on ancient Asgardian motifs, rather than the sleek lines of a conventional iron battlesuit, he created something altogether different. He'd seen the impressive Super Beast armors, like the Whale Shark King's bulked Ut shell or Hades's grim helm, and admitted they were handsome in their own right. But in Ethan's mind, no design could match the raw grandeur of his winged, crystal-helmed masterpiece. Ethan stood at the center of the material dimension, where runes swirled around the world tree's roots like living strands of energy. At his feet lay the shattered fragments of the destroyer armor he'd once worn. The realm's power surged and sifted through them, digesting every shard in an instant. Under that godlike force, even the hardest alloys, from dragon steel to dark iron, dark silver, and vibranium, melted like candle wax. Once purified of all impurities, the molten metal began to reshape itself at Ethan's command. In moments, gleaming plates and bars fused into armor of impossible design, sweeping pauldrons, a sculpted breastplate, greaves, vambraces, and most striking of all, 6 majestic black wings, each pair arching farther than the one below. The design whispered of the underworld god's raiment, Hades transfigured in steel and shadow. Ethan closed his eyes and willed the pieces together. Instantly, they burst into radiant motes of light, spiraling upward to cocoon him. A translucent helm formed over his brow. Black and gold pauldrons locked into place on his shoulders. The breastplate followed, then arm and leg guards. Finally, the sleek metal wings swept out behind him, their gilded edges catching every stray beam of light. He felt the armor meld to him, weightless yet unbreakably firm, as if it had grown from his own skin. Its principal hue was deepest onyx, with veins of burnished gold tracing every contour. Ethan inhaled, savoring the quiet thunder of power radiating off his new regalia. In that instant, he knew he wore not just armor, but the very authority of a world. Ethan's new armor was a breathtaking fusion of sweeping curves and razor-sharp angles. Its sleek pauldrons and slender greaves caught the light with an almost predatory gleam, giving the entire suit a sense of lethal precision. Proud, opulent, and cloaked in mystery, it suited Ethan's flair for the dramatic. Nothing he wore went unnoticed. He deliberately steered away from an all-black design. That solemn, heavy look belonged to Hades himself. Silver was out of the question, too. It felt cold and lacked the commanding presence he wanted. Instead, he chose deep matte black offset by rich gold trim. The gold lent a regal nobility, the black a solemn gravity. Together they spoke of kingly authority and unassailable dominance. And this wasn't merely a showpiece. Forged when the material realm digested the destroyer armor's divine power, it translated godlike energies into mortal craftsmanship. In every polished plate and jagged edge, Ethan could feel the echoes of the gods, reproduced and reforged to suit a warrior of flesh and blood. Ethan felt the surge of power the moment he sealed himself inside the new armor. It was as if every fiber of his being had been reforged, his strength, agility, and endurance all skyrocketed. Though he remained uncertain whether the cursed red sunlight would one day rob him of his abilities, this armor left him unafraid of any foe. Clasping the final breastplate into place, he murmured in awe, "From now on, I shall call you the God of Destruction." This was no ordinary set of plates and steel. Ethan had poured nearly every ounce of his own life force into enchanting the armor, ensuring that even if his power ever waned, he could call upon the God of Destruction to restore him. The infusion triggered a breathtaking transformation. The armor's dark plates rippled and reformed, and behind him a blazing halo, like a miniature sun, erupted in golden radiance. It was both beautiful and terrifying. With access to the material dimension, the power he had once lost rushed back to him in an instant. Even if he ever found himself outside that realm, the armor's latent doomsday enchantment could passively reignite his strength, now to levels he'd only dreamed of before. Standing in the heart of his workshop, Ethan closed his eyes and let the Ni Wu energy course through him, determined to master the material dimension and unlock every secret the God of Destruction had to offer. Ethan realized that by tapping into the material dimension, he could fully assume the true primordial forms of Doomsday and Broly, rather than the fused yet imperfect version he currently wore. With his 3-in-1 fusion, he already outclassed Broly's power, but restoring Broly's original might would elevate him to an entirely new dimensional tier. The combined force of the Reality Gem and the Power Gem was undeniably formidable, yet the granular laws of the material dimension promised even greater precision and far deeper reserves of power than he'd ever accessed before. Chapter 214, Crazy Sheep Grabbing from the Dark Dimension. Ethan surveyed the swirling eddies of energy around him and smiled in satisfaction. To him, this material plane, born from the same fabric of reality as Mars, was now the Empire. It was a portable dimension far superior to any mere storage space and immune to the power drain that plagued conventional space gems. He had called the true Martian Empire's alternate plane the Empire Dimension, a realm so advanced it had long since forsaken Mars itself. Still, Ethan believed the Martian Empire had its uses, and few could even set foot in his new domain. With the Empire, he mused, I can traverse any world with my allies and my prizes whenever I choose. His prize in particular was what excited him most. Luring Broly into the Empire Dimension and allowing his creation to assimilate the Berserker's power would, Ethan was sure, catapult him into the ranks of the legendary Super Saiyans. He hadn't been quick enough to snatch the ancient doomsday entity, but Broly's raw potential more than compensated for that failure. And beyond Broly, Ethan still commanded two of Dragon Ball's mightiest lone fighters, Mystic Gohan and the legendary Son Gohan. Yet even that arsenal wasn't enough. He had one final experiment in mind, channeling energy from his own power gem into the material dimension itself. If successful, the plane he called the Empire would grow stronger with every pulse of condensed ki. It was a reckless gamble, but then, Ethan was known among interdimensional circles as the Dimensional Demon precisely because he embraced such madness. He tapped the power gem, feeling its glow intensify. Broly roared in the adjoining chamber. Mystic Gohan's aura flared blue, and Son Gohan stood ready like a coiled spring. Everything was in place. Soon, the Empire dimension would not just imprison worlds, it would rule them. And Ethan would emerge as the true legendary Super Saiyan. The final phase of his plan was about to begin, and nothing in any dimension could stop him now. Ethan's goal was to master energy, souls, and even entire dimensional realms. Ever since he first uncovered that material plane, the space gem had remained restless, relentlessly probing the cosmos for more hidden dimensions. Yet despite its power, it yielded no new worlds for the time being. Ethan couldn't help but wonder if the legendary Emperor of Europa had cast some subtle obstacle in his path. How else could he have uncovered that first realm so easily, only to see the trail vanish? Unable to summon another dimension on demand, Ethan decided to strengthen the one he already controlled. He turned to the power gem, whose true gift was the effortless mobilization of cosmic energy. Not mere radiation or mystical fumes, this was the raw life force of the universe, the very essence that fuels godlike beings in the Marvel multiverse. Warriors who cannot sense or channel such energy remain formidable yet finite, comparable to any blade master undefeated only up to the divine threshold. But cosmic energy itself is boundless. In the comics, Thanos absorbed unimaginable volumes of it to transcend even the multiverse tier. It's a dizzying idea. Imagine him devouring 900 million currents of primordial chi and the swirling chaos of the void, yet that's the only way to grasp the scale. At its highest magnitude, cosmic energy becomes the catalyst that lets mortals shatter every ceiling and ascend to true omnipotence. And that was precisely the power Ethan sought to unlock. Ethan stared at the swirling data on his holoscreen. It mapped every ounce of cosmic energy known to exist, and what struck him most was how little of it was truly within his reach. First-level cosmic energy, the primal force born at the moment of the Big Bang, was the rarest and most fiercely guarded. God-level entities had carved it up among themselves, each hoarding vast reserves. Unless Ethan could track down and defeat those titans and toss their remnants into the Empire dimension for imperial absorption, first-level cosmic energy would remain forever out of his grasp. The next tier down was only slightly more attainable, the second-level cosmic energy. This was the raw power that simmered within the dimensional demons scattered across countless realms, the wellspring of what scholars called the energy dimension. Its potency was staggering. After all, it was this very essence that the Ancient One had siphoned from Dormammu's dark realm to render herself effectively immortal and empower her beyond any ordinary sorcerer. Yet even she didn't rely solely on artifacts like the Eye of Agamotto. So complete was her mastery of the mystic arts that Odin himself dared not meddle with Midgard, or any of the 9 realms, once she rose to prominence. Outside of Agamotto, she was without peer. At the inaugural Wizarding Conclave convened by the Vishanti, she was elected Supreme Wizard and then re-elected term after term. That conclave boasted attendees from every corner of the multiverse, including some of its most malevolent deities. To wear the title Supreme Wizard was more than an honor. It came with a direct infusion of the Vishanti's catalytic power. Now, as Ethan plotted his own ascent, he knew the path forward would demand every ounce of cunning and every scrap of cosmic energy he could muster. Ethan squared his shoulders, weighing the rules of the contest. The Eye of Agamotto was off limits, meaning his rival, the Ancient One, had won this round by sheer force alone. Even Dr. Stephen Strange, usually so confident, had faltered more than once under these constraints. The Power Stone, Ethan reminded himself, commanded every form of energy in the universe, but it couldn't conjure anything from nothing. Its strength was limitless, but only if you already had the energy in the first place. Thankfully, Ethan had a plan. He would borrow what he needed. Kamartaj hadn't been wasted on him. In his studies, he'd painstakingly memorized the summoning contracts for countless extra-dimensional demon lords. Each contract still pulsed with the faint essence of its creator. That essence alone was not enough to pinpoint a demon's realm, but the Space Stone could. By tracing the unique breath embedded in Dormammu's contract, Ethan could zero in on the Dark Lord's coordinates and siphon off the power he required. Dormammu had been one of the Sorcerer Supreme's oldest and most exploited sources of power. Ethan doubted the demon would protest a little more rent. He smiled to himself. Why challenge a stronger foe when the softest target lay so conveniently within reach? Tonight, he'd pay another visit to Dormammu and leave with exactly what he needed. They arrived at the threshold of the Dark Dimension. The Space Stone flared to life, tearing open a vortex rimmed in electric blue, its center a churning void of deepest black. Ethan hesitated. Beyond lay an infinite expanse of shadows. He'd goaded Dormammu before, but he knew well. Within this realm, Dormammu was a god. Only other multiverse-tier entities could stand a chance against him here, and none had ever truly subdued the Dark Lord. Power Stone, Ethan intoned. The gem in his hand pulsed with violet light, as though hungry for release. At once, a torrent of dark energy poured through the rift, tendrils of pure malevolence, crackling with destruction, corrosion, and an oppressive sense of dread. Such energy does not answer to just anyone. Even the boundless shadows of the Dark Dimension would have refused him without Dormammu's consent. But once the Power Stone awakened, the darkness came willingly, filling the air with a cold, ominous breath. Ethan touched his chin, a faint smile curling at the corner of his mouth as he surveyed the roiling void. Ethan stared at the writhing orb of dark energy suspended before him and felt a chill crawl up his spine. This was no ordinary power source. It carried Dormammu's essence, and within it lay the raw, ungoverned forces of the Dark Dimension. Time, space, matter, energy, causality, life, death, all the laws that held their universe together were meaningless in its presence. Even a demon who'd mastered the cosmos' secrets would gain nothing from venturing into the Dark Dimension unless he, too, transcended the limits of a single universe. Still, Ethan had an ace up his sleeve. With a gesture, he summoned the Empire Dimension, his pocket realm, around the sphere. At once, tendrils of ethereal violet light snaked out and began to absorb the dark energy. Ethan watched in astonishment as his dimension swelled, its boundaries stretching outward until it was nearly 10% larger than before. "It actually works," he murmured, awe mingling with relief. As the last dregs of Dormammu's power dissolved into the Empire Dimension, the gem set into Ethan's chest armor flared to life. Its purple glow intensified, bathing the expanded realm in a dazzling amethyst radiance. In that moment, Ethan knew he'd taken the first true step toward matching, and one day surpassing, the Dark God himself. Ethan watched in horror as the Shadow Realm unleashed an unstoppable tide of dark energy, threatening to drown the entire Empire Dimension. Even with the Empire's greatest siphons working around the clock to absorb it, they stood no chance against the relentless torrent channeled through the Power Gem. Chapter 215, Return. Ethan had devised a bold plan. He would force the surging energy of the Dark Dimension into the Space Gem and then compress it down to the size of a mustard seed. With the gem's power over space, he could contain that wild, rippling force in a pocket no bigger than his palm. He worked quickly, knowing that any hesitation would alert Dormammu, and he certainly didn't want the Lord of the Dark Dimension breathing down his neck. Even though Ethan already wielded 3 Infinity Stones and felt confident he could confront Dormammu on his own turf, he wasn't in the habit of taking unnecessary risks. This method, borrowing the Dark Dimension's power instead of wading straight into its heart, seemed infinitely safer. Within minutes, the raw energy was drawn in and compacted, vibrating like a storm trapped in a seed. But Dormammu did not sleep forever. Less than an hour after Ethan sealed the last fragment of dark energy away, reality seemed to shudder, and then snap. A fissure tore open in the air outside Ethan's sanctuary, and a voice boomed across the astral winds. "Who dares drain the lifeblood of my realm?" Dormammu manifested, his flaming crown blazing, his eyes like twin suns of fury. He scanned the surroundings, trying to pinpoint the thief. Ethan could almost hear the godlike being's thoughts. Is it the Ancient One back from the grave? How else could anyone have siphoned off a quantity of power comparable to an entire solar system? In the vastness of the dark dimension, even that loss might seem petty. But to Dormammu, every iota of energy was his dominion, and every stolen atom was a wound. Before he could be drawn back into his realm to repair the damage, he had tracked the culprit to this exact spot. Ethan steadied himself. The seed-sized cage of compressed darkness pulsed at his belt, waiting to be unleashed. Across the threshold, the towering form of Dormammu advanced, tendrils of shadow dancing at his sides. The chamber's air crackled with anticipation. As student faced ancient god, and the stolen power of an entire dimension trembled in the balance. Dormammu's arrival did little to ease the tension. He immediately sensed that something was very wrong. This portal wasn't crafted in the refined manner of Karmataj's magic, nor was it anything the Ancient One would endorse. The Ancient One always preferred to borrow cosmic forces with a polite incantation, not rip open reality and let it devour the void like a starving leviathan. Annoyed, Dormammu lashed out with a surge of containment magic, trying to choke off the dark energy feeding the gate. For a heartbeat, the flow stuttered, but then the portal's hunger exploded tenfold. In an instant, it devoured more of the surrounding darkness than before, swallowing up every drifting mote of shadow. Ethan watched the power stone at his chest flare with energy. He'd felt its intake slow for just a fraction of a second, so he cranked its output even higher, and the portal responded by siphoning in an even greater torrent of dark essence. Within moments, he'd sealed away several compressed pockets of pure shadow. Then came the backlash. A titanic pulse of dark energy surged out from beyond the gate. Space itself trembled as silent ripples of power radiated through the entire Empyrean dimension. Dormammu's discovered us, Ethan growled, tightening his grip on the shimmering air before him. He planted his feet and squared his shoulders, ready to confront whatever fury lay on the other side of the portal. Boom! 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 A cataclysmic force rippled through reality like nothing the universe had ever seen. In a single decisive motion, Ethan repelled Dormammu's dark energy wave, then sealed the rift in one breath. Kick, slam, and it was gone. Dormammu stared in disbelief. He lashed out with a tentative strike, but the space gateway vanished without a trace. Even Dormammu's own senses, attuned to every shadow of dark power, could not locate the intruder. Who is that? Dormammu roared, fury vibrating through the Imperial dimension. Around him, realm trembled. Chaos unfurled like a storm, and the material plane teetered on the brink of collapse. Dormammu winced as echoes of the blast reverberated through him. After draining so much of my dark energy, I still can't withstand the backlash? But Ethan didn't feel a thing. He shook his head, unharmed. In his grip gleamed the gauntlet of the god of destruction, an artifact that, combined with his own power, had already proven capable of slaying a god-level adversary. No shockwave, no backlash could touch him. Good. Let it break down completely, he thought. Only then could he rebuild it more perfectly. With a controlled exhale, Ethan released the pent-up dark energy that had filled the collapsing space. He molded it with his will, reshaping the physical dimension from the wreckage of the old. The process was swift. Where chaos had reigned, a new world coalesced. He expanded and reinforced it, forging a planet several times the size of Earth, his own grand design brought to life. Once the final ripples of destruction settled, Ethan stood at the center of his creation, surveying the horizon of raw matter and energy he had reclaimed. The material dimension was stable again, but now it bore the unmistakable stamp of its new architect. And somewhere beyond its bounds, Dormammu seethed, his questions echoing unanswered in the void. Ethan stood before the shimmering boundary and considered the yawning chasm between material dimensions and true energy dimensions. Material realms, he reminded himself, are forged from vast concentrations of energy, but they can never match the boundless depth of a pure energy dimension. In the cosmic hierarchy, a world the size of a planet already ranks among the largest material dimensions imaginable. Behind him, his own power surged like a rocket. Even so, this single universe lay at the very bottom of the scale, practically zero in the grand ledger of creations. And yet, as the undisputed lord of gods and demons within this material realm, Ethan's strength was far from trivial. He thought of Asgard, propped up by Yggdrasil, the world tree. Without that backing, Odin would never have attained the renown he now enjoyed. His realm spanned no more than a single continent, after all. By sheer force of will and divine favor, Odin had carved out a status equal to Ethan's. Today, the two immortals stood on even ground. Ethan could slay Odin with a stroke of his power, and Odin could do the same to him. Still, Ethan recognized the same looming threat that dogged Odin. As long as the Empire dimension endured, divine power would continue to amass without end. Here, however, lay Ethan's advantage. His body had been honed to withstand ever greater torrents of divinity, an unbreakable vessel forged for infinite escalation. No matter how potent the divine surge, Ethan knew he would not be the one to buckle under its weight. Chapter 10: Ascension of Divine Power. Ethan could feel his divine power swelling within him, an ever-accelerating force that transformed his body into something endlessly stronger. No incarnation, even one forged in Odin's mold, could contain such power. From the moment the material dimension solidified around him, his divinity was set in motion. It pulsed with a single purpose: destroy, conquer, ignite, unleash war. This raw divine force sprang directly from Ethan's origin, molding itself to his will. Within the Imperial dimension, he stood as a true omniscient, omnipotent being, able to command every law of existence as naturally as breathing. But once he stepped beyond those heavenly borders, he could no longer lean on the Imperial realm's built-in rules. He had to wield his own god power. Even so, his innate body remained intact without it. Divine energy simply operated on a higher tier, always at the ready, and infinitely easier to deploy. A cunning thought crossed Ethan's mind. Would he grow even stronger if he plunged back into the Imperial dimension and absorbed its essence for himself? The prospect excited him. He began plotting ways to amplify his personal Empire dimension, foe, enlarging it into an unassailable stronghold. In the long run, he would continue to exploit the demon gods of every major realm, harvesting their power, toppling their defenses, and then push outward, seeking entirely new dimensions ripe for the taking. Thus, with power mounting and ambition blazing, Ethan charted a course toward absolute dominion, one universe at a time. Ethan's immediate goal was clear: stand against the autumn wind, crush every powerful adversary, and fold their realms into the ever-expanding Empire dimension. With the Empire's influence stretching into the Super Seminary world, he'd struck pacts and treaties everywhere he went. Though offered a place in Ego's inner circle, Ethan chose instead to remain in the Super Seminary world. Now that he wielded his own dimension, he had bigger plans. Above all, he wanted to bring Cheelin into his safe haven. The Empire dimension was his private realm, a world she could call home without fear. No longer would he worry about her safety during their interworld travels. He tested the portal and sighed in relief when it held steady. Even here, amid the floating towers and arcane academies of the Super Seminary, he could open the gateway to his world. Before making his move, he'd arranged for Cheelin to settle in a distant city, far from Xiangbinglian's icy frontiers. There, under the protection of the Kryptonian civilization, and close to her parents, she'd be secure until he was ready to fetch her. Cheelin. Because Ethan's clone had been living with her, she barely blinked when he appeared. Curious, she asked, "What's wrong?" Over the past weeks, their bond had deepened faster than either of them expected. If it hadn't been for the clone as an intermediary, Cheelin might have matured even more quickly under Ethan's guidance. He studied her for a moment, then said softly, "I have something important to tell you." Ethan had saved so many people from Blue Star, and now he finally decided to come clean with Cheelin. She cocked her head, amusement dancing in her eyes. "What is it?" she asked with a playful smile, as if she were bracing for a marriage proposal. She tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "I haven't even put on any makeup yet." Ethan drew in a steadying breath, meeting her gaze. "There's something I need you to know," he said softly. "My name is Ethan, and I am the God King of the Kryptonian civilization." Chapter 206: Cheelin of the God Clan. "Isn't April Fool's Day still a week away?" Cheelin frowned, crossing her arms. She shared a name with God King Ethan, but she certainly didn't expect him. one of the most powerful beings in existence, to be sneaking off for a quiet evening with a lowly policewoman. Are you joking? A god king on a date with me? Ethan stepped closer, his expression softening. I thought it might seem unbelievable, he said, slipping an arm around her slender waist. That's why I waited. In an instant, his divine aura blossomed around them. They lifted from the ground, floating through the ceiling as easily as drifting smoke. Wood and plaster dissolved before them, and Cheelin's eyes went wide at the night sky above. As they rose, Ethan's power poured into her like a purifying river. It washed through her bones and cleared her marrow, imbuing her with a vitality she'd never known. The Super Seminary's finest rebirth treatments, its marrow and bone cleanses engineered by the greatest technomancers, could never match this living grace. In their world, super warriors and divine bodies were forged by machine, flawless, sterile, free of even the tiniest imperfection. Yet Ethan had chosen Cheelin's warm, unpredictable humanity, and to him, no polished artifice could ever compare to the perfection of flesh and blood. Cheelin sat motionless, disoriented, her mind still reeling from what had just happened. She didn't regain any clear sense of reality until Ethan gently guided their flight above the city and came to a stop. The wind died away, and with it, her confusion. She stared at him, wide-eyed. I can't believe someone actually did that to me, she whispered, voice trembling with shock and indignation. She traced the contours of his face, searching for some clue that might have prepared her for this moment. If Ethan had revealed his true identity sooner, would it have spared her this humiliation? Instead, she blurted out the question heavy on her mind. Ethan, if you really are the God King of the Kryptonian civilization, can you help Blue Star? He met her gaze calmly, as though he'd anticipated exactly that plea. I'm sorry, he said at last, but I don't have that obligation. My first duty is to the Kryptonian people. Cheelin's shoulders sagged. She nodded, forcing herself to accept his answer. Every day, survivors flocked to the city he protected. Ethan and his civilization had already done more than anyone could have asked. Even as their God King, he would be bound by the needs and politics of Krypton. He could not unilaterally marshal its resources to save a fledgling world. And so, with silent resignation, Cheelin let the matter rest. Cheelin's clear judgment had kept her from demanding that Ethan, the God King, simply bend the universe to his will. She wasn't the sort of woman to be unreasonable or to expect special favors just because he loved her. From her earthly perspective, made all the more pronounced by the secrets Ethan kept, it made sense. Claiming Kryptonian civilization was the perfect cover story. Someday, when she learned the true nature of the theocratic order and its grand civilization, today's half-truths would barely matter. She met his steady gaze. So, she asked, you finally told me because you couldn't pretend any longer. A faint smile curved Ethan's lips. She felt the solid ground beneath her feet, and with it came a surprising calm. It did take me too long, he admitted. He nodded, as though reassuring himself. You know how it is for His Majesty the God King. Wearing the mask of an ordinary man for so long is exhausting. Cheelin returned his nod, stepping forward until their hands brushed. His openness, his willingness to drop every pretense, was all she had ever wanted. And in that moment, it was more than enough. Cheelin hesitated, staring up at him. Your Majesty, why do you care for me? She'd always thought herself a plain, unremarkable human. Compared with Du Changwei and the other super warriors from the Super Seminary Star Show, she was nothing special. Why would the Di King, ruler of an entire civilization, be interested in her? Ethan's lips curved into an amused smile. Love at first sight? He teased softly. I could have anyone in my realm. Goddess is more beautiful than you in every way. But there's something about you. He leaned closer, his tone warm and almost conspiratorial. Tell me, after centuries of exotic delicacies, edible birds' nests, sharks' fins, don't you ever crave something simple? A bowl of home-cooked soup, fresh bread, real comfort food. Cheelin's cheeks flushed. She opened her mouth to reply, only to find Ethan's gaze so intent and approving that her words caught in her throat. After a moment, Ethan chuckled. Do you think it's only your cooking that keeps me disguised among mortals? No, I stay hidden because I long for moments like this, moments with you. He gave her hand a gentle squeeze. You're the only one I want at my table. Ethan leaned back against the lab table, arms folded, and offered Qilin a reassuring smile. Don't doubt it. You've already been upgraded. You're officially a super soldier now. Qilin's eyes widened. A super soldier? But I don't feel any different. With all due respect to Hollywood, Ethan teased, we didn't lock you in a transparent chamber or bathe you in glowing serums. There's no golden skin, just peak human performance, courtesy of advanced gene therapy and biomechanical enhancements. Qilin pressed her palms together, still unconvinced. All right, prove it. Ethan reached into his lab coat and pulled out a rough, gray chunk of concrete. He handed it to her. What does that look like? She turned the block over in her hands. Concrete, or maybe some alien relic you picked up on Krypton. Call it concrete, Ethan said with a grin. Go ahead, crush it. Qilin narrowed her eyes, uncertain. She gripped the block firmly and squeezed. To her astonishment, the concrete disintegrated in an instant, turning to dust in her hands as though it were nothing more than chalk. She barely exerted any force, and yet the once solid chunk collapsed without resistance. Staring at the powder trickling through her fingers, Qilin blinked. Is this real? She whispered, awestruck. How is this even possible? Ethan shrugged, still smiling. Science and a little bit of advanced engineering. Welcome to your new strength. Chapter 7. Forging a Goddess. Qilin stared at the gleaming metal plate in her hand and let out a slow breath. This is steel, she murmured, turning it over so the harsh overhead lamps caught every edge. Ethan watched her with a faint smile. And that one? He prompted, nodding toward a second sheet. She picked it up carefully, testing its weight. Titanium alloy, she answered, almost to herself. Then, curiosity overtook caution. She squeezed. To her shock, the once solid metal yielded under her grasp, flexing like softened clay rather than biting into her palm. Even when she pressed harder, the alloy didn't slice her skin. Instead, it bent and rippled beneath her fingers. When she pulled apart the sheet, it cracked on command, tearing like thick taffy. Incredible, she whispered. Ethan stepped forward. Your new form channels my divine power directly. At the base level of the single universe tier, most beings can barely contain cosmic energy, let alone transform raw metal with a touch. You're the first to wield it with such precision. Qilin flexed her fingers, molding a jagged fragment into a crude dagger shape before letting it shatter. So this power, it's mine to shape? Yes. Ethan's eyes gleamed with pride. Think of it as sculpting reality. You imagine it, you create it. That's how the new gods in ancient myths worked. What you hold now is merely the beginning. Her heart pounded. In her old life at the Super Seminary, mastering even basic elemental magic had taken years of disciplined study. Now, in a single afternoon, she had leaped from novice to something resembling a war deity. A goddess born in a heartbeat. She closed her eyes and let the energy flow. Steel, titanium, even exotic alloys, every material at her fingertips obeyed her will. She could craft armor plating, fold them into shields, or snap them apart in an instant. It felt like breathing. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You haven't learned to harness it fully yet, he cautioned. A true war god knows when to unleash the storm and when to hold back. You're already on par with the Red Star's legendary divinities, but you have the potential to surpass them. Qilin opened her eyes, determination burning within. Then teach me, she said. I want to become the greatest protector this universe has ever known. Ethan gave a confident nod. Very well. Our first lesson begins now. And with that, the Forge of Godhood roared to life around them. Ethan could have transformed Qilin into a lightning Qilin, much like Black Adam or Shazam, but he thought it far too strange and chose not to. In any case, Qilin was already thriving in her new divine form. Becoming a goddess had only strengthened her further. Chapter 217, Success. This is the pinnacle of our Kryptonian god-forging technology, Ethan said, his voice steady. With it, you've become one of the universe's great gods, easily ranked in the top 10. Qilin stared at him, utterly speechless. Top 10 gods in the entire known universe? Seriously? And you're just handing this to me? Her mind spun. A humble native of Blue Star, now vaulted overnight into the ranks of cosmic deities? It felt like a dream. Had she somehow slipped into one of those transmigration novels where the heroine rises to omnipotence, subdues countless worlds, and inevitably falls for the God King? What she dismissed as a ludicrous fantasy now loomed terrifyingly real. Her heart pounded so fiercely she feared it might burst. Ethan's earlier confession that he himself was a god king had already stunned her, but this revelation threatened to shatter every shred of her sanity. She opened her mouth, only to choke on the enormity of it all. Ethan, and then her voice failed her entirely. Master, if you share this technology with me, no one on Krypton will object, right? Cheelin's voice trembled with both hope and embarrassment as she spoke the words she'd kept locked inside for so long. For the first time, she dared to call Ethan by his rightful title, husband. It was a confession of gratitude she felt she could never fully repay, yet she offered herself to him without reservation. Ethan's eyes lit up at her words. They had stood side by side through countless trials, but he'd never insisted on formal titles, and Cheelin had always been too bashful to bring it up. Now that she had, his heart swelled. I always hoped you would, he said softly, reaching to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. Though Ethan possessed the power to mass-produce divine constructs at will, he prized rarity above all else. Cheelin was unique, his first true collaborator, the only one to master this sacred art of creation in her own right. She was the first being to taste that power, to shape a deity from her own soul. In every way that mattered, she was unparalleled. Ethan, I'm sorry for doubting you, Cheelin whispered, lowering her gaze in earnest remorse. Her mixture of contrition and defiance, so characteristic of her playful spirit, was utterly irresistible. With a gentle sweep, Ethan drew Cheelin into his arms, cradling her at his side. She stiffened for a heartbeat, unprepared for the sudden closeness. Wait, she began, panic flickering in her eyes. But Ethan only smiled, his fingers brushing against the arcane seal at his belt. There's no time to wait, he murmured. Before Cheelin could protest, the world around them rippled with light. The seal unleashed its power, opening a gateway to the Imperial dimension. In an instant, they vanished together, Cheelin held securely in Ethan's embrace, hearts racing as they hurtled toward their next adventure. Ethan's gaze softened as he watched Cheelin struggle with her emotions. She bit her lower lip, meeting his eyes with unguarded frustration. You scoundrel, she whispered. How am I supposed to keep living like this? For years, Cheelin had poured every ounce of her hope into a life that now felt wasted, a lifetime tethered to promises that hadn't brought her peace. She knew she shouldn't let despair rule her, but these thoughts were relentless. Taking a steadying breath, she surprised herself with a bold request. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could stay together, to share each other's company, forever? A gentle smile curved Ethan's lips. He stepped closer, the air around them humming with the effortless power of the Empire dimension. Here, a single thought can reshape reality. Magic, cosmic forces, they're all at your command. Outside this realm, it would take unimaginable effort to freeze a moment like this. Cheelin swallowed, searching his face. You're the supreme god king, she said quietly, and yet the only thing I have to offer you is myself and the people of Blue Star. Does that truly matter to you? She had never been foolish enough to believe in fairy tale, love, at least not blind devotion. The world was too vast, hearts too fragile. Phrases like mutual respect and perfect equality sounded comforting, but were they enough to bind two souls through life and death? True, lasting love was rarer than any miracle. Her shoulders sagged, and she managed a small, rueful smile. All these might come someday, but why bring it up now? Ethan looked away for a moment, rubbing his chin as though reconsidering the question. When he met her gaze again, there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, a vulnerability he seldom revealed. Because, even as the God King, I have no idea what the future holds. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. In the soft glow of the Empire's ever-shifting sky, their unspoken hopes and fears hung between them, fragile yet strangely beautiful. Ethan didn't even know if he belonged to a single, fixed timeline, let alone if he was the only one of his kind. The future was a blur of possibilities. Still, he couldn't help but feel self-conscious about his looks. Cheelin, too, doubted herself, but that was okay. Feelings, after all, could be nurtured. Cheelin glanced at him thoughtfully. Then, will I have to acknowledge other sisters? Now that her anxieties had eased, a mischievous notion sprang to mind. To a divine sovereign like Ethan, wasn't it only natural to keep a harem of thousands? Perhaps he already had a queen and a host of princesses. Maybe she'd been lucky enough to join their ranks. You know, she continued with an innocent smile, there might be a queen above me, and other princesses I'd have to address before I could call you mine. What sisters? Ethan's voice was amused. Your queen and your princesses, Cheelin replied, as if stating a simple fact. He shook his head, lifting her chin gently. I don't have any of that. No queen, no princesses. You're the first woman I've ever cared about. He paused, searching her eyes. And even if I did have 18,000 concubines, I wouldn't care. Cheelin's heart skipped. For a moment, her resolve wavered, then a small, incredulous laugh escaped her lips. The idea was so absurd, yet in it lay the promise of something real. Do you really think our king is just being sentimental? Or that these top-tier super-god civilizations care so deeply about lineage and marrying within noble families? Ethan shook his head. It wasn't surprising that the people of Blue Star held such notions. Their view of super-god power had been warped by Huaye and his followers, but it was still wildly off the mark. Their supreme ruler didn't just inherit a throne. He wielded divine might, unlike anything Blue Star minds could fathom. Imagining him fussing over family trees was like picturing a king tilling his fields with a golden hoe. Cheelin's already luminous eyes grew even wider. She felt as if she'd hit the jackpot. No, that wasn't the right metaphor. It was more like finding a single gold nugget on the roadside and then discovering it marked the entrance to an entire vein of pure gold. The story of a god king, the supreme sovereign of an alien civilization, falling in love with a mere mortal, was already the stuff of legend. But the twist that truly staggered her was this. The all-powerful God King had remained, despite his infinite abilities, a virgin. Ethan leaned back, eyeing Cheelin over the rim of his wineglass. What's the difference between this and those romances where a perfect wife claims she's only raising the children for her siblings, yet somehow remains flawless? It's all fanciful nonsense. Cheelin shook her head, a wry smile tugging at her lips. That would never work for me. Ethan met her gaze coolly. What you've lived through, anyone with my abilities could absorb it in a femtosecond. It's trivial data. At his words, Cheelin couldn't resist. She threw her arms around him. Are you trying to smother me with affection now? He chuckled, taking another bite of the roasted rabbit's front shoulder. Exactly. So, how is it? Delicious? Pulling back to glare playfully, Cheelin tapped the morsel in his hand. It's good, but I prefer the hind leg. A comfortable silence settled between them. When the last of the meal was cleared away, Cheelin's expression softened, and she reached for his hand. Ethan, about my parents. Have you made any arrangements for them? There was a hint of something new in her tone. Confidence. In the past, she would have been cautious. This was, after all, an extraordinary favor. But now that she knew she was Ethan's first partner, she felt free to turn on the charm and press her advantage. Cheelin had already laid out the plan, so she skipped the usual small talk and cut straight to the point. What's the arrangement? She asked. Ethan didn't hesitate. He reached into his coat and produced 2 slender vials filled with a swirling silver liquid. These contain the super soldier gene, he explained. Administer 1 vial to each of your parents. Once they're injected, they'll be transformed into super soldiers. Chapter 218. A Gift. Honey, you're too kind. Cheelin laughed as she settled back next to Ethan to continue their meal. She didn't mind in the least that he just teased her about her remaining doubts. After all, Ethan had explained that once you ascend to godhood, nothing, no dust, no airborne impurity, not even metabolic waste, remains. His body's own air purifier system and the dark energy reactor in his stomach converted every stray particle into pure energy, leaving no excretions behind. Still, Cheelin found the idea unsettling, so she had slipped away to her father's lab and returned with 2 vials of supergene serum. These weren't exotic formulas granting elemental fire or telepathy. Their sole gift was dramatically extended longevity. In her family, both she and her father shared the same unbending determination. Long life meant the power to stand toe-to-toe with any alien threat. Ethan understood her reasoning. Yet he couldn't help wondering whether stretching his lifespan so far beyond her own might strain their bond. He cared for Cheelin more than anything, but he couldn't promise to be by her side every moment of every century. There would inevitably be missions, duties, battles that pulled him away. That was why Cheelin insisted on the vials. If Ethan were gone, even for years, She'd have her father, her strongest ally, to watch over her. And when they reunited, they'd face the universe together, as equals in power and resolve. Ethan slipped through the dimly lit corridors of the Tau-T research station, every footstep echoing against cold metal walls. When he'd last parted from Delana, he deliberately planted a seed of doubt in her mind, a psychological trap meant to break her captor's hold. Now, having tracked the Tauties to this remote outpost in the Styx Nebula, he intended to set her free. Behind reinforced glass, Delana sat bound by an absolute vacuum containment field. Her heart burned with fury. I'm not strong enough, she thought, recalling how Pan Zhen and the others had refused to lift her gene-lock authority. Because of that denial, the Tau-Ts had subjected her to endless experiments, tortures that ate away at her dignity. Her blood boiled. Once I escape, she vowed, I will annihilate the Tau-T civilization and reduce the Styx Nebula to nothing. A soft voice cut through her dark resolve. This is rather embarrassing, Lena. Delana's chest tightened. She turned and froze. Standing in the corridor beyond the glass was Ethan, his calm eyes fixed on her. For a moment, she thought she imagined him. Then disbelief gave way to hope. You, Ethan? How did you find me here? She whispered. Ethan didn't hesitate. Don't overthink it. I told you I'd be watching because I care about you. He stepped forward, voice steady but warm. I love you, Lena. With a small gesture of his hand, the containment field flickered and collapsed. The silence that followed was heavier than the vacuum that had held her. Free at last, Delana sank to her knees, blinking against the harsh light. Ethan crossed the few remaining feet and reached for her. Come on, he murmured, helping her to stand. Let's get you out of here. As alarms began to wail in the distance, Delana's resolve shifted from vengeance to survival, and to the promise of a future where she and Ethan would fight side by side, stronger than ever before. Ethan's hand hovered in the air before it settled lightly on Delana's cheek. She froze, acutely aware that she stood in nothing but her underwear beneath the harsh glow of the corridor lights. The Liuyang Confederacy tried to cage you, he said softly. The Tau-T would have done the same. Come with me to the Kryptonian Alliance. I promise no one will ever bind you again. He offered her a gentle smile. But please, put me down before I go on. Delana crossed her arms, leaning away from his touch. I said no. If you won't respect my choice, I'll leave. I never impose on others or cause harm. Ethan's brow furrowed with genuine concern. You're so guarded, so practical. Why not free me and we, in Empress Liang's favor? It could secure your safety and mine. She let out a short, bitter laugh. What good is the Empress's friendship? It's hollow. I'd rather earn your trust, have you as an ally, as a friend. Before she could finish, his grip tightened on her upper arms. Hey, stop wriggling. You're taking advantage of me. Delana's heart pounded as she tried to pull back. I'm not. Ethan released her at last, stepping back. His eyes searched hers. So, he said quietly, what's it going to be? 3, 2, 1. Ethan's voice counted down, calm and unhurried. Tau-T will be through that door in 3 seconds. Delana's eyes widened. No, don't you dare! She snapped, throwing her hands up between them. Her protests were half-hearted, though. Ethan simply brushed her away and kept speaking as he stepped forward, hands busy ruffling through the patch of grass at their feet. Your magical barrier barely registered, he said, see here, flicking aside a tuft of weeds. It's not words that would stop me, so don't move or please mean nothing. Panicked, Delana scrambled to reinforce her ward. Ethan only smiled, pleased by her fluster. See? Still nothing. With a quick sweep of his free arm, he dispelled the last of her feeble enchantments. The moment her defenses fell, Delana's knees buckled, and she collapsed. In one fluid motion, Ethan caught her, cradling her against his chest. Breathing hard, she stared up at him. Your system shut down, Ethan observed, voice gentle now. Did an intruder slip past your guard? Delana opened her mouth to answer, then froze. He'd settled one hand at her waist, the other lingering on the curve of her hip. His unexpected touch sent a shiver straight through her. You, she whispered, cheeks aflame. Ethan's lips lifted in a slow grin. Honestly, Delana, I wouldn't mind if you started calling me Your Majesty. Heat flooded her face. He patted her side reassuringly. Each gentle stroke made her tremble. Swallowing hard, she straightened as much as she could in his arms and glared up at him. I've joined your side, yes, but that doesn't mean you can. She cut herself off, searching for composure. Behave yourself, got it? Ethan laughed softly and set her down. All right, no more mischief, at least until after this mission. Behind them, the heavy door began to rattle on its hinges. Towdy had arrived. They exchanged one determined look, words and teases forgotten for the moment, and stepped forward together to face whatever lay beyond. Ethan's approach was silent, yet every step echoed through the shattered hangar. Delina, trembling among twisted metal and drifting sparks, could barely steady her breath. She had never witnessed such raw power, never been treated with such cold calculation. He didn't regard her as a frightened child. His eyes were the same fierce, predatory gaze he'd once shown generals like Xin Zhao on the battlefield. I was only joking, Ethan said, a faint curl to his lips. His voice was calm, almost indifferent. In my civilization, I honor my word. I act as I please. Now that you're my subject, these rules apply to you too. If I let you defy me here, what's to stop you from carrying your chaos from the Liang civilization into the Kryptonian Empire? A monstrous Tauti charged out of the shadows. With a single gesture, Ethan shattered it into dust. Then, as if on impulse, he raised his gauntlet again, and the entire starship collapsed in on itself, folding into nothing more than drifting particles. Come, he ordered, and a rippling portal opened beside them. Without a second thought, Ethan stepped through. Delina followed, unable to resist. They emerged in a grand, dimly lit corridor lined with banners of the Kryptonian Empire. Delina's heart thundered in her chest. She tried to speak. Save your breath, Ethan interrupted, his gaze cold. Delina forced herself to stand tall, trying to reclaim the dignity she'd cultivated back on Blue Star. She hadn't crossed galaxies for idle boredom. She was poised, she was learned, and above all, she was divine. I am Delina, she declared, voice quivering yet resolute, solar goddess and herald of the future sun. I demand the respect due to a god. She squared her shoulders and met Ethan's stare, determined to remind him that even a little girl could command a universe. Yet beneath her defiance, a chill ran through her veins. In his presence, no one, goddess or not, was ever truly safe. Ethan never looked more at ease than when he sat there, cradling Delina on his lap. She was almost naked, just two narrow strips of cloth, yet he wore a faint, confident smile, as if none of it surprised him at all. You can talk all you like, he said softly, but it won't change anything. My stellar technology outstrips anything your sun's civilization has ever dreamed of. Solar energy? I've got an endless supply. To me, you're just another so-called goddess. Have you ever tried haggling for respect with Pangen, Morgana, Karl the god of death, or Holy Kaisha? Delana's eyes widened. She had no answer. She'd witnessed Ethan create a true star with a single motion of his hand. It was small, yes, but a genuine star nonetheless. One that, once released, would ravenously consume nearby matter, its gravity pulling in dust and gas until it grew to full strength. This was a power far beyond the sunlight technology of the Liang civilization. And now, face to face with its creator, Delana could only watch in stunned silence. Chapter 219. To Ethan's ultimate technique, Sun Incarnation, did more than light up the battlefield. Drawing deep on the power of the light of the sun, he formed a miniature star in midair. Its searing brilliance drove back the surrounding darkness until all that remained was a single point of radiance, hovering like a new sun. The sheer force of creation crackled on his fingertips, reminding everyone that Ethan had shaped a stellar object with nothing but his will. But Delana didn't want to hear about his triumph. She stood before the glowing orb, her silver hair drifting in the faint heat. Up to now, people had worshipped her for her genetic gifts, the very engine that powered Sun Incarnation, and yet Ethan had never seen her as a tool or a prize. He saw her, Delana, not just the living embodiment of sunlight. That alone filled her with relief and joy, but also an unexpected emptiness. All her life she'd taken pride in her role as the light of the sun, believing that her beauty and power were her greatest worth. If Ethan valued her simply for who she was, what would become of her identity? What happened when brilliance faded, or someone no longer needed her gifts? Would she lose her value, her reason for existing? Delana met Ethan's calm, unreadable gaze. She searched his eyes for answers, any sign of warmth or doubt, but found nothing she'd seen before. In that still silence, she realized that respect and affection were fragile things. and for the first time she wondered what lay beyond the light she'd always known. Ethan stood in the throne room, his posture rigid and unwavering. Candlelight danced across his features as he spoke in a measured tone. "You need to understand one thing. I, as your king, cannot and do not love you." His words were as sharp as any sword, delivered without hesitation. The truth was, only Chillin had ever stirred something genuine in him. Even a superhuman being could fall for an ordinary, unremarkable mortal, and Ethan was no exception. After overcoming the genetic flaws that once numbed his emotions, he'd reclaimed his capacity to feel, and he could say with absolute honesty that he liked Chillin, that he loved her. Delena, however, was different. His interest in her was purely physical. He admired her beauty, perhaps even coveted it, but there was no deeper affection. With Bulma, it had been the same, a calculated attraction, nothing more than a strategic use of her appeal. Desire for their bodies, and nothing beyond. Whether time might change that, he couldn't say. Delena's shoulders slumped, disappointment flushing her cheeks. "So, you're just after my body?" Ethan's gaze remained cool. "Naturally. Otherwise, what would be the point of coveting your genetic engine? It means nothing to me, emotionally." He offered no comfort, no mitigation. He could not grant her the hopes she so desperately wanted. Better that she understood the reality now. Delena bit her lip, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're remarkably honest." Ethan inclined his head in acknowledgement and turned away, leaving her to grapple with the truth he'd laid bare. Ethan stretched out his hands with a teasing smile. "I don't have any feelings for you, at least not yet, but if you put in the effort and make me fall in love, who's to say I won't?" Delena's cheeks flared. "Stop leading me on," she snapped. Then, after a moment's pause, she realized, was this his way of tempting her? To win his heart, she'd have to become irresistible. She exchanged a look with Keelan, and both goddesses silently wondered the same thing. How many princesses or queens did he already have? "Then tell me," Delena demanded, regaining her composure. "How many women are in your court? Princesses, queens, all of them?" Ethan chuckled, unfazed. "Only one, my queen." "One?" Delena echoed, brow furrowed. "Just one queen? No concubines? No admirers at all?" He shrugged, confidence shining in his grin. "Do you honestly think anyone could tempt me away?" His unexpected honesty cut through her defenses. She'd only met Ethan a handful of times, and never had his presence felt so bold, so undeniably magnetic. Yet with those few words, he planted a seed of doubt and a spark of pride deep in her heart. If he truly had no one else, then perhaps she, too, could be the one to claim his devotion. Even as a goddess, she'd never believed a god-king could be so singularly faithful until now. Ethan's performance had far surpassed Delena's expectations. His carefully crafted identity had even fooled both Chillin and herself, and to be honest, he'd rather underestimated this mysterious woman. Standing before him with an inscrutable expression, Ethan cast a cool glance her way. "Is your queen easy to get along with?" Delena's composure faltered. The last of her defenses crumbled, and she shook her head free of doubt. "Of course she is," she said, her voice steadier now. "You." She hesitated, searching his face. "I think you and Her Majesty will get along very well. You'll be like sisters." Before Ethan could respond, the air around them shifted. The imperial dimension darkened, gusts of wind whipped through the tall grass, and a cold, steady rain began to fall, each drop sparkling like dew on the earth. Delena's resolve melted away in that sudden storm. She stepped closer, shivering, and then let herself slide into Ethan's arms. At first, she strove to remain composed. But as thunder rumbled overhead and the rain masked her tears, every ounce of her resistance gave way. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling. He tightened his embrace, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. "I'm here," he said softly. He knew better than to do anything abrupt. Rather than pull away, he held her against his chest, letting his steady presence be all the comfort she needed. "I promise," he murmured in her ear, "you'll never have to doubt me again." For a brief moment, Delena clung to him, her fears soothed by his warmth. But by the time 15 minutes had passed, the gentle vulnerability in her eyes was gone. She drew back, straightening her shoulders, and fixed Ethan with a sharp gaze. The tenderness in her voice had vanished. "Ethan," she said, every syllable crisp with resolve, "we need to speak." Ethan smiled confidently. "My schedule is solid. I guarantee nothing will go wrong." Lena hesitated, uncertain what he meant. She guessed he was talking about balancing his duties to the Kryptonian Empire, the Queen, and her. Even without a harem of 3,000 beauties, Ethan certainly kept busy. She cleared her throat. What about the Liang civilization? Are you going to send word to Pan Zhen? He shook his head. Actually, it's better if I don't. Lena bit her lip. If the Sun civilization ever clashed with the Kryptonians, the Suns would be wiped out. She'd be caught between two worlds, torn between loyalty to her own people and her bond with Ethan. Noticing her worry, Ethan's grin widened. Scared, he reached out and gently lifted her chin. I rescued you with honor. The least you can do is trust me now. If Pan Zhen or the Liang government protests, fine. I'll halt my plans the moment we reach Tiandao Star, just to protect your family's legacy. Lena rolled her eyes, exasperated. Sure, and while you're at it, why not conquer half the galaxy, then graciously stop because I asked you to? She couldn't help a wry smile. Knowing Ethan, just a promise was practically a challenge. Ethan only laughed, a deep, certain sound that echoed in the silent corridor. Whatever came next, she suspected her life was about to get very interesting. By the time Ethan and his allies reached Tiandao Star, the Liang civilization would be reduced to holding only half of it. Lena never doubted whether Ethan and the Krypton civilization could pull it off. Given the might they'd already shown, setting foot on Tiandao Star might seem ambitious, but to conquer the entire Tiandao galaxy? That would be well within their grasp. Meanwhile, Pan Zhen was nearing desperation. He'd intended to consult the god of death, Karl, but Lena had vanished without a trace. Pan Zhen had been keeping a close watch on Reina, and the sudden hacking and shutdown of the sunlight engine sent him into a panic. When he finally discovered that the sabotage was the independent work of the Tao-Ti civilization, he resolved to have it out with Karl in person. Yet by the time Karl arrived at the Death Song Academy, both Reina and every sign of Tao-Ti had vanished. Pan Zhen couldn't even pinpoint Reina's location. His heavenly Tao Tower offered no answers. The gravity of the situation left him feeling utterly powerless. Still, after pacing the Academy's great hall over and over, he steeled himself and set off to find the god of death, Karl. Only Karl, the god of death, has both the power and the opportunity to pull that off. As for Ethan, his motives within the Kryptonian civilization remain obscure and his direction undefined, so Pan Zhen doesn't give him a second thought. Chapter 220, A New Threat Death God. Karl stared at the readout on the grand clock and frowned. Unlike Pan Zhen, who still clung to doubts, Karl already had a firm suspicion about who'd ambushed Delena. The clock's calculations had once ruled Ethan out. The odds of him acting against the goddess were vanishingly small. Yet with Delena now missing, Ethan was the only plausible target left. Karl had just laid waste to the Holy Kesha and raced back to the Angel Nebula to marshal his forces. There was no way he could personally confront Reina in her domain right now. That meant Ethan, whose ruthless efficiency he knew all too well, had to be behind this blow. What troubled Karl even more was Ethan's recent black hole experiment. By detonating a miniature singularity, Ethan had harvested an unprecedented quantity of void matter, arguably the rarest substance in the entire Super Seminary universe. To appreciate its value, consider this. It takes at least 50 units of void matter to synthesize a single void particle. Karl himself could trigger black holes and still rely on the grand clock to locate every stray void particle in the cosmos. He had no shortage of raw materials or the means to search them out. So why, Karl wondered, would Ethan seize on Reina as a target instead of simply producing his own void particles? Those questions had hardened into certainty. Ethan was the new threat Karl could not ignore. With Delena gone and the void matter enigma unsolved, all eyes in the universe now turned toward him. They must have been taken by Ethan, seized and dragged off somewhere unknown. Karl, the god of death, could barely hide his resentment. All he'd done was collect the void matter that Ethan had discarded, mere scraps in Karl's view. Yet, Holy Kesha had pinned him down with grueling questions about whether he'd been experimenting with exploding black holes. He insisted, with more indignation than truth, that he was nothing more than a scavenger. Meanwhile, Pan Zhen arrived at Death Song Academy in a blaze of authority. In the original accounts, he had stood firm against any challenge. Every word, every gesture, proclaimed him a super-divine god of civilization. After all, he was the regent. But pride often precedes a fall. When Karl quietly dispatched a strike force to annihilate the Liang civilization, Panzhen's vaunted power proved hollow. His people crumbled before the onslaught, and whispers began that perhaps the mighty regent had been overrated all along. Yet there was a deeper lesson here, one that no one could ignore. In this age, to lag behind was to be destroyed. Take the Sun civilization, for example. Closed off behind its brilliance for 10,000 years, it believed its boundless light energy made it invincible. Their ability to detonate stars, an ultimate deterrent, scared off countless would-be aggressors. But deterrence is nothing more than delayed defeat when the world around you is changing faster than you can adapt. In the end, the Sun civilization, too, was obliterated at the frontier of the Void Era. The unstoppable tide of history washed over their blazing suns, snuffing out their light forever. The power of the void had rendered the gleaming energies of the solar civilization utterly meaningless. No matter how vast their stockpiles, no matter how swiftly they could erect fleets and fortresses, much like activating cheat codes in Warcraft, Starcraft, or Red Alert, they still could not bend void matter or void particles to their will. They could amass resources by the ton, but they could not manufacture the void itself. Panzhen left Karl, the god of death, empty-handed when it came to the exact whereabouts of his missing goddess. Yet Karl had offered a critical clue. Retrieving her was not the exclusive purview of the Death Song Academy. In the far reaches of the galaxy, angels and demons alike might hold the key. Even the Kryptonian civilization, or the newly emerged New Dino, could possess the means to pierce the void's defenses. Armed with this revelation, Panzhen forged a tentative alliance with Karl. The shifting balance of power in the known universe demanded that the Liang civilization adapt, or risk being left behind. Their collaboration with the Death Song Academy was only the first step in a far larger game. Meanwhile, back on the training grounds, Ethan and Raina had spent the day in high spirits, honing their skills and teasing one another between drills. Lena, too, seemed transformed. Years of restraint had stifled her true nature, but now, with the burden of secrets finally lightened, her real personality was beginning to shine through. Now that Ethan had unlocked his true power, he realized that unless he was the strongest being in this realm, he stood no chance of conquering Raina. And worse still, she might conquer him instead. No wonder angels take only one mate. Their bonds would be far too easy to overturn otherwise. Ethan reflected that a goddess's divine form must naturally outclass a god's. Among mortals, women endure countless pregnancies, while men, well, they simply can't. It was probably no different on the divine plane. With that in mind, Huaye's prowess seemed all the more astonishing. Raina herself was baffled. She had planned to humiliate Ethan and cement her dominance as Empress by besting him in their ongoing duel of words. For 5 million words, they'd traded barbs and rebuttals. Yet as their word war continued into its second 5 million, she found herself routed again and again. Ethan was growing bored of the lopsided sparring. Had she offered real resistance, he might have crafted another 10 million words of banter. Chapter, "What is the makeup of his divine form?" Ethan asked softly. "And make sure you get some rest." He gave Raina a reassuring pat on the shoulder as she stood atop the ridge. Then he turned and strolled away, a faint smile on his lips. With that, his 2 objectives at the Super Theological Seminary were complete. In truth, the seminary's only remaining value to him lay in those achievements. Any hidden abysses or ultimate terrors lurking beneath its halls held no further interest for Ethan. He glanced skyward, already moving on to his next goal. Ethan found Du Changwei not far from the shattered courtyard where the black armored company had once made its stand. Now there was no sign of them, no banners, no lingering sentries, nothing. Blue Star's last hope of organized resistance had collapsed the moment Ge Xiaolun betrayed the cause and threw in his lot with the demonic civilization. Ge Xiaolun had convinced himself that the demons could finally bring order to the monsters and dark spirits plaguing Blue Star. But Morgana, the demon queen, had her own agenda. Unmoved by his arguments, she instead wove her subtle influence around him, until even he admitted that the planet's devastation was a blessing in disguise, a crucible that would force Blue Star to evolve. Du Changwei knelt in the dust, every muscle trembling. At her side stood two formidable figures, Morgana, the demon queen with her crown of midnight horns, and Seraphiel, the angel queen draped in robes of molten gold. Between demons and angels, Du Changwei was caught in a no-man's land, desperately fighting to maintain her balance, both physically and mentally. Ethan paused at the edge of the courtyard and watched. Behind him, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows over ruin and ruin. His next move would decide not just Du Changwei's fate, but the fate of Blue Star itself. With a steady breath, he stepped forward into the fray. Few could deny that this formidable alliance was tailor-made for Ethan, the era's rising hero. Under his leadership, the Kryptonian civilization had successfully shielded Blue Star, a feat that won him the favor of the Qilin and the trust of Commander Du Changwei. In light of the escalating threat, Du Changwei revised her orders. Instead of routing rescued survivors to Northern Star or Yellowstone City, she would send them to the city of Krypton. It was the only practical option. Blue Star was overrun by malevolent spirits. Enormous Taudi, beasts, and giant wolves patrolled the skies, and any intruder risked being strafed by floating gunboats or pursued by armed skycycles. On the surface, swarms of lesser demons and winged imps roamed unchecked. Neither Yellowstone nor Northern Star had the defenses to shelter refugees safely. Only Krypton City, fortified by Ethan's Kryptonian allies, could offer true sanctuary. This decision infuriated Morgana, who insisted it amounted to aiding the enemy. Yet she overlooked a crucial reality. Beyond enhanced genetics, a civilization's greatest assets are its people and their faith. Across the known universe, genetic resources had long since been parceled out. Blue Star alone remained untouched because of its unique origin. Now, under Du Changwei's directive, its surviving population would find refuge among the Kryptonians, their hopes secured in the city of Krypton. From the way the Kryptonian civilization is mobilizing, it's clear they intend to strike us all in one decisive blow. Morgana, however, has been anything but idle. She never restored the demonic essence merely to bolster her own power. She did it to prepare for Krypton's coming onslaught. In the wake of Holy Kesha's destruction, Morgana and Death Carl realized that Ethan had risen as an even greater menace than Kesha himself. Faced with this new threat, Morgana devised a daring scheme. She would exploit Blue Star's immense genetic stores to breed a demon army. With so much genetic material at her disposal, she could spawn millions of lesser demons and forge hundreds of second-generation demon warriors.